The static hums, and the void leans closer. I dare you to let these words crawl into your skull tonight, Wanderer. Welcome to Nocturnal Nightmares TV, where the rain isn't just falling. It's digging graves for the stories it buries. Tonight, we resurrect horror so vile, even the thunder holds its breath. You'll beg to click away, but I dare you to listen to the end. If your bones ache with dread, pledge your loyalty. Smash subscribe and let the algorithm carve your name into its blacklist. Drop a drop of blood in the comments if you're watching from a place where the walls breathe. Your screams fuel our next descent. Now turn your screens glow to ash. Let the storm's teeth sink into these tales. The darkness isn't just listening, it's taking notes. Will you survive the final whisper? The air in my living room is thick and heavier than the humid Georgia summer night outside. It clings to me, a suffocating blanket woven with dread. Every shadow seems to writhe. Every creak of the old house screams a silent warning. I know why. Annie is here. Started a week ago with Jim. We found him in his workshop, tools splayed around him like fallen soldiers, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended death. The official report called it a heart attack, but I saw the purple fingerprints on his throat and the faint, spectral glow around his lifeless body. I knew. Then came May. Her pristine white apartment, usually a haven of order, was a scene of chaotic horror. Mirrors shattered, furniture overturned, and May was pinned to the ceiling, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, a scream forever frozen on her face. The police called it a home invasion gone wrong, a deranged attacker. But I saw the wisps of black hair clinging to the broken glass, the distinct scent of lilies, Annie's favorite, hanging heavy in the air. Our secret had been buried for years, a festering wound beneath the veneer of our adult lives. Now it was erupting, spewing forth its venom in the form of a vengeful ghost, a ghost we had created. We were inseparable back then. Jim, May, Annie, Mark, Jane, and me, 6 friends, bound by the careless arrogance of youth. We thought we were invincible, untouchable. We were wrong. The prank was Jim's idea. Annie was sensitive, a little fragile, perhaps. She believed in things, spirits, omens, the power of intention. We, in our infinite wisdom, decided to exploit that. We planned a seance, a fake one, to scare her. We thought it would be funny, a harmless prank. We set the stage perfectly. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls of Jim's basement. We whispered nonsense words, pretending to conjure spirits. Annie, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, was completely engrossed. Then, Mark, hidden behind a curtain, unleashed the coup de grace. He triggered a mechanism that made a heavy chandelier swing wildly, coming dangerously close to Annie's head. It was supposed to be a controlled scare, a moment of manufactured terror followed by laughter and relief. But something went wrong. The chandelier, loosened by years of neglect, broke free. It crashed down, not near Annie, but directly on her. The sound was deafening, a sickening crunch of metal and bone. We stood there, frozen, the laughter dying in our throats, the air filled with the metallic tang of blood. Annie lay still, a grotesque sculpture beneath the shattered remains of the chandelier. Panic seized us. We were young, terrified, and desperate to protect ourselves. We concocted a story, a lie so elaborate and convincing that even we started to believe it. We said the chandelier had simply fallen, an accident, a tragic twist of fate. The police investigated, found no evidence of foul play, and closed the case. Annie's death was ruled an accident. We mourned, we grieved, and we buried our guilt deep within ourselves. We vowed never to speak of it again. We thought we had gotten away with it. Until now, the house groans again, a deep, mournful sigh that vibrates through my bones. I clutch the crucifix I wear around my neck, its smooth surface cold against my trembling fingers. It feels useless, a pathetic defense against the unseen terror that stalks me. Mark is next. I know it. He called me earlier, his voice ragged with fear. He swore he saw Annie standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes burning with hatred. He begged me to come over to protect him. I told him to call the police to barricade himself in his room. I couldn't face her, not yet, but I know it's only a matter of time. She's getting closer, tightening the noose around us, one by one. I pace the living room, my mind racing. I need to find a way to stop her, to appease her anger. But how do you reason with a ghost, a vengeful spirit fueled by the injustice of her death? I think back to the seance, to the moment the chandelier fell. I remember the look on Annie's face, the innocent trust that we had so cruelly shattered. I remember the weight of the chandelier in my hands as we helped dispose of it, the sticky feeling of her blood on my skin. Perhaps the answer lies in confronting the truth, in finally acknowledging the extent of our betrayal. Perhaps if we confess, if we finally admit our guilt, she will find peace. But how can I confess to something that will destroy everything I have built? My career, my reputation, my life. It's a risk I can't afford to take. But can I afford to die? A cold gust of wind sweeps through the room, extinguishing the flickering candlelight. The shadows deepen, becoming more menacing, more real. I hear a faint whisper, barely audible, but filled with a chilling intensity. You can't hide from me, David. My blood runs cold. She knows my name. She knows what I'm thinking. She's in my head. I stumble backward, knocking over a table. A framed photograph crashes to the floor, shattering into a million pieces. It's a picture of us, the six of us, taken years ago. We're young, carefree, smiling for the camera, oblivious to the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. As I kneel to pick up the pieces, I notice something strange. Annie's face in the photograph is no longer smiling. Her eyes are hollow, black pits of despair. And in the reflection of the broken glass, I see her standing behind me. Her skin is pale, almost translucent. Her black hair hangs limply around her face, obscuring her features. But I can see her eyes, burning with an unholy light. I'm here, David, she whispers, her voice raspy and chilling. It's time to pay for what you did. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. My throat is constricted, paralyzed by fear. I feel a cold hand on my shoulder, a grip that tightens with each passing second. I close my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. I deserve this. We all do. But then, a different kind of scream escapes me. A primal, guttural sound born of years of suppressed guilt and terror. It's not a scream for help, but a scream of acknowledgement, a scream of confession. We're sorry, Annie. I choked out. The words were raw and painful. We're so sorry. We didn't mean for it to happen. Please, forgive us. The grip on my shoulder loosens slightly. The air in the room seems to lighten, the shadows receding. I open my eyes, and Annie is still there, her gaze still intense, but something has changed. There's a flicker of something else in her eyes, something that looks almost like sadness. It's too late for forgiveness, David, she whispers, her voice softer now, almost mournful. But perhaps it's time for the truth to be told. And then she's gone. I'm left alone in the darkness, trembling, gasping for breath. The air is still thick, but the suffocating dread has lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. I know what I have to do. I have to go to the police to tell them everything. I have to face the consequences of my actions, no matter how dire. It won't bring Annie back. It won't undo the pain we caused. But perhaps, just perhaps, it will finally bring us some peace. Perhaps it will finally silence our hidden screams, and hopefully, finally set Annie's soul to rest. But I was wrong, so wrong. She came back. That night, while I was asleep, leaned over me and whispered, "Now we are all together again." My screams went silent. The rain hammered against the windshield, blurring the already indistinct world outside. Headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a ribbon of slick asphalt that seemed to stretch into an infinite, inky abyss. I gripped the passenger seat, the cheap plastic cold and unyielding beneath my sweaty palm. "Relax, Mark," Nick slurred from behind the wheel, his voice thick with alcohol and a manic energy I usually found amusing, but tonight sent a shiver down my spine. "It'll be fun." Just a little adventure. Fun. That was Nick's default setting. He could turn a trip to the grocery store into a quest for the perfect avocado. But this was different. This was reckless. This was stupid. We were a carload of regrets hurtling down a country road, the aftermath of a party that had dissolved into a haze of cheap beer and poor decisions. 15 of us, childhood friends mostly, bound together by years of shared history and a collective penchant for pushing boundaries. Tonight, Nick had decided to push us right off a cliff. Nick, seriously? I pleaded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Let's just go home. We're drunk. It's late. This is a bad idea. He just laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the confined space of the car. Come on, Mark. Where's your sense of adventure? Old man Peter's been dead for 50 years. He won't mind if we borrow his tombstone for a bit. Old Man Peter. The name alone sent a shiver through me. He was a local legend, a recluse who lived in a crumbling farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Rumors swirled around him like the mist that clung to the fields surrounding his property. Whispers of dark rituals, pacts with devils, and a madness that eventually consumed him. They said he was buried in the old, forgotten cemetery just outside of town. The cemetery, that was where we were headed, to dig up Old Man Peter's tombstone and, as Nick so eloquently put it, call upon the darkness. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't put my foot down. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the pressure of the group. Maybe it was the insidious lure of the forbidden, the childish thrill of daring to do something truly wrong. Whatever the reason, I stayed silent as Nick turned off the main road and onto a rutted track that led towards the darkness. The cemetery was exactly as I imagined it. A desolate patch of land swallowed by overgrown weeds and crumbling stones. The moon, when it briefly peeked through the clouds, cast long, skeletal shadows that danced across the graves. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The 15 of us piled out of the cars, a motley crew of drunken fools suddenly sobered by the chilling reality of our surroundings. Even Nick's bravado seemed to falter slightly as he shone a flashlight across the rows of weathered headstones. "Okay, team," he announced, his voice a little less confident. "Let's find Old Man Peter." It didn't take long. His tombstone was larger than the others, a crude, imposing slab of granite etched with a name that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Peter Eldridge, born 1880, died 1930, and beneath a single chilling word, Malthakarn, sorcerer. The sight of it sobered me completely. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't just drunken mischief. This was something else, something dangerous. "Nick, we need to stop," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is wrong. We need to leave." He ignored me, already directing the others. "All right, you two, grab that side. You three, the other. Let's get this bad boy out of here." With a grunting effort, they pried the tombstone from its moorings. The sound of stone grinding against stone echoed through the silent graveyard, a sound that seemed to rip through the fabric of the night. Once the tombstone was free, Nick produced a tattered book from his backpack. I recognized it instantly, a forbidden text he'd acquired during his ill-advised dabbling in the occult. He opened it to a marked page, the yellowed paper brittle and cracking with age. "Okay, listen up," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This is the incantation. Just repeat after me." He began to chant, his voice growing louder, more insistent with each word. It was a language I didn't understand, a guttural, primal tongue that seemed to claw at something deep within my soul. The others, swept up in the moment, joined in, their voices a chorus of drunken bravado and terrified anticipation. I stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The wind picked up, swirling around us, whipping our hair across our faces. The trees groaned and swayed, as if in pain. And then, Nick spoke the final words, a chilling pronouncement that seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of reality. He cursed Peter Eldridge's name. Nothing happened. For a moment, we just stood there, breathless, waiting. Then, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the group. It was over. We'd done it. We'd tempted fate and gotten away with it. Nick, emboldened by the apparent lack of consequences, let out a triumphant whoop. See? I told you it would be fun. We left the cemetery, laughing and joking, the tombstone abandoned in the back of Nick's truck. We were invincible. We were untouchable. We were wrong. The first death came a week later. Sarah, found dead in her apartment, her body contorted into impossible angles, her eyes wide with terror. The coroner ruled it a freak accident, a fall down the stairs. But I knew it was more than that. Then came David, crushed beneath a falling tree during a hike, followed by Emily, who drowned in her bathtub. Each death was gruesome, inexplicable, and undeniably linked to that night in the cemetery. The fear began to spread, slowly at first, then like a raging wildfire. We tried to talk about it, to make sense of it, but the words caught in our throats, choked by the weight of our shared guilt. We knew what was happening. Old Man Peter was claiming his due. One by one, we started to die. I'm writing this now, huddled in my apartment, the curtains drawn, the doors locked. I can hear the wind howling outside, a mournful wail that sounds like Peter Eldridge's laughter. I know I'm next. I can feel it in my bones. A cold, creeping dread that consumes me from the inside out. Nick is already gone. They found him in his car, his body mangled beyond recognition, as if something had ripped him apart from the inside. I try to pray, but the words are empty, meaningless. I deserve this. We all do. We were foolish enough to disturb the sleep of the dead, to call upon the darkness. And now the darkness is answering. The scratching at the door is getting louder. It's not an animal. It's not the wind. It's him. I can feel him. He's here for me. I can hear him whisper my name. Mark, can't. The writing abruptly stops here. The chill settled deep in my bones. A damp, creeping cold that had nothing to do with the November air. Birchwood Station, abandoned for 50 years, swallowed by the relentless creep of nature. Yet, tonight, it hummed with an unnatural energy. I come seeking a story. As a writer of macabre tales, I'd heard whispers, drunken ramblings in pubs. Internet threads dismissed as folklore of the ghost train of Birchwood. They said it appeared only on the darkest nights, a midnight express ferrying souls to destinations unknown. I, of course, had scoffed. Until tonight, the train was real, gleaming black iron, its paint impossibly pristine. It hissed and clanked, a mechanical beast breathing in the silent station. Steam, thick and acrid, billowed from its engine, obscuring the already faint moonlight. An unsettling chime, ancient and resonant, echoed from within. A foolhardy bravery, fueled by cheap whiskey and a writer's desperate need for inspiration, washed over me. Climbed aboard. The interior was opulent, disturbingly so. Velvet seats, polished mahogany panels, ornate gas lamps casting an eerie, flickering glow. It was like stepping back in time, into a forgotten age of luxury and dread. And then I saw them, passengers, shadowy figures draped in antiquated clothing, their faces obscured by hats and shawls. They sat motionless, their gazes fixed on some unseen point, emanating an aura of profound sorrow. A shiver crawled down my spine. These weren't cosplayers or some elaborate prank. This was something else. I stumbled down the aisle, searching for the conductor, for some semblance of normalcy. I found him in the final car. He stood with his back to me, a tall, gaunt figure in a faded uniform. "Excuse me," I said, my voice wavering. "Where is this train going?" He turned, or rather, his body did. Where his face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse of skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank canvas of chilling nothingness. I recoiled, a scream building in my throat. The faceless conductor raised a hand, his touch impossibly cold as it brushed my arm. "Your destination is inevitable," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper that seemed to come from the very air itself. He gestured towards a window. I hesitated, dread clinging to my insides like cobwebs. Slowly, I turned and looked. Outside, the world was a blur, streaks of black and gray rushing past. But etched onto the glass, superimposed over the frantic landscape, were gravestones. Row upon row of them, bathed in an unnatural, ethereal light. And on each and every one, my name was carved in stark, unforgiving letters, Daniel Harding. Panic seized me. I ripped myself away from the window, stumbling back towards the conductor. "Stop the train. I want to get off." He simply shook his head, that horrible blankness where his face should be somehow conveying a chilling amusement. "There are no stops, only destinations." I lurched forward, grabbing at his arm, desperate to force him to act. But my hand passed right through him, as if he were made of smoke and shadows. He was a phantom, a figment of this nightmare train. I fled back into the passenger cars, desperate to find a way out. The other passengers remained still, oblivious to my terror. Were they even aware of what was happening? Were they already gone? I tried the doors at the end of each car. Locked. I smashed a window with my bare hands, the glass shattering and slicing my skin. But when I tried to climb through, an invisible barrier stopped me, a force field of pure dread. The train continued to hurtle through the darkness. The gravestones outside the windows multiplied, each one a stark reminder of my impending doom. Days blurred into nights. Time lost all meaning. The faceless conductor continued his silent vigil, a constant, chilling reminder of my fate. The phantom passengers remained in their seats, trapped in their own silent purgatory. Sleep offered no respite. I was plagued by nightmares of empty graves and faceless figures, their silent screams echoing in my mind. Awake, I was consumed by a relentless, gnawing fear. I tried everything. I screamed, I pleaded, I raged. I begged the conductor to stop the train, to let me go. I even tried to reason with him, appealing to whatever vestige of humanity might remain beneath that blank exterior. But he remained silent, impassive, a harbinger of my demise. As time wore on, I began to notice a change in the passengers. Their forms seemed to coalesce, to become more solid. Their faces, once hidden in shadow, began to emerge, gaunt and pale. They started to look at me, their eyes, hollow and filled with an ancient sorrow, fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. They whispered, their voices a chorus of mournful sighs. I couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. They were welcoming me. I looked out the window again. The gravestones were closer now, larger. The inscriptions were clearer, the letters of my name burning into my retinas. I could see the details of the stone, the cracks and fissures, the moss clinging to its surface. And then I saw it, on the horizon, a faint, flickering light, a village shrouded in mist, its buildings ancient and crumbling. This was it, my destination. The train began to slow, its brakes screeching against the rails. Pulled into another station, even more derelict than Birchwood. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and damp earth. The faceless conductor gestured towards the open door. The phantom passengers rose from their seats, their eyes fixed on me, their hands outstretched. I knew what I had to do. There was no escape, no turning back. This was my inevitable destination. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped off the train. The cold was intense, a bone-chilling grip that paralyzed me. The phantom passengers surrounded me, their touch like ice. They led me towards the village, towards the graveyard that lay at its heart. As we walked, I noticed something strange. The ground beneath my feet began to feel softer, like soil. I looked down. My feet were sinking into the earth. My legs, then my torso, were being swallowed by the ground. I was being buried alive. The phantom passengers continued to guide me, their faces impassive, their touch relentless. I looked up at the gravestones looming before me. They were no longer inscriptions on the glass, but real, solid monuments, standing sentinel over my final resting place. And then it was over. The earth closed over my head, smothering me in darkness. I was buried alive, entombed in the cold, unforgiving ground. But the horror didn't end there. I could still see. I was looking up through the earth, through the soil and the roots, at the underside of my own gravestone. The faint light from above illuminated the inscription, Daniel Harding, and then I felt it, presence beside me, another figure, lying in the earth, staring up at the same gravestone. I turned my head. It was the faceless conductor. He was no longer faceless. His features had begun to emerge, gaunt and pale, his eyes hollow and filled with an ancient sorrow. He looked at me, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "Welcome," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Now you are one of us." And I understood. The ghost train of Birchwood wasn't just transporting souls to their final destination. It was recruiting them. It was building its army. And now I was a passenger, a conductor, a prisoner of the ghost train, forever bound to its endless journey. The train lurched forward, starting its endless journey again. I know the next stop, Birchwood Station. I can almost hear the sound of footsteps and smell the whiskey and desperation as he enters the train seeking a story. He'll find one all right. The rain was a relentless battering ram against the mangled fuselage. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the skeletal remains of trees that clawed at the heavens, their branches stripped bare by some unseen force. Black Lake Forest. Even the name tasted like ash in my mouth. We were 17, a motley crew of survivors huddled together in the wreckage, nursing injuries and the gnawing realization that rescue wasn't coming anytime soon. The pilot, what was left of him, lay slumped in his seat, a grim reminder of our precarious situation. Of the 30 souls that boarded that flight to Black Lake County, only 17 remained. The storm raged for what felt like an eternity, each thunderclap a fresh wave of terror crashing over us. But it was the silence that followed that truly chilled me. A silence so profound it felt thick enough to choke on, broken only by the ragged breathing of the injured and the drip, drip, drip of rainwater from the shattered roof. Then the smell. It started faintly, a metallic tang in the air that I initially attributed to the wreckage. But it grew stronger, more pungent, until it was an undeniable stench of rot and decay that turned my stomach. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I instinctively reached for my mask, a futile gesture in this open-air tomb. "What is that smell?" A young woman, barely more than a girl, whimpered, her voice trembling. Her name was Sarah. I remembered. She was heading back home after her university degree. No one answered. We all knew, deep down, that it wasn't something we wanted to acknowledge. It was the smell of death, amplified and distorted by something else. The first sign came a few hours later, after the storm had finally begun to subside. A guttural rasping, emanating from the deeper recesses of the forest. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard, a horrifying symphony of snapping bones and tearing flesh. "What was that?" stammered Mark, a construction worker with a broken arm and a face ashen with fear. "Animals," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just forest animals scavenging." But my words rang hollow, even to my own ears. These weren't the sounds of scavengers. These were the sounds of predators, and their prey was disturbingly close. Then came the screaming. It started as a faint, desperate cry, quickly escalating into a blood-curdling shriek that ripped through the night. It was coming from the back of the plane, where the bodies of the less fortunate passengers lay still strapped in their seats. We scrambled to our feet, armed with whatever makeshift weapons we could find, shards of glass, broken metal, even the flimsy plastic trays from our in-flight meals. The screams continued, punctuated by the sickening crunch of bone. "We have to do something," Sarah cried, her eyes wide with terror. "We can't," I said, my voice trembling. "We don't know what's out there." But inaction was no longer an option. Whatever was feasting on the dead was growing bolder, its appetite insatiable. The screams were closer now, the stench of decay almost unbearable. Then I saw them, glimpses at first, fleeting shadows moving among the trees, their forms indistinct in the fading light. But as they drew closer, their shapes became horrifyingly clear. They were tall, gaunt figures, their bodies twisted and deformed, covered in a patchwork of decaying flesh and matted fur. Their limbs were elongated, ending in wickedly sharp claws that dripped with blood. Their faces were hidden beneath grotesque masks of bone and sinew, with empty sockets that seemed to burn with an unholy light. They were the creatures of Black Lake Forest, and they were hungry. Panic erupted. We surged towards the front of the plane, desperate to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and the horrors that were tearing apart the dead. But the creatures were faster than we anticipated. They lunged from the shadows, their claws extended, their guttural roars echoing through the forest. Mark was the first to fall. He tripped over a seat, and before anyone could react, one of the creatures was upon him. I watched in horror as it tore into his flesh, the sickening sound of his screams abruptly silenced. We fought back with everything we had, but our makeshift weapons were no match for their ferocity. One by one, we fell, our cries joining the chorus of terror that filled the night. I managed to scramble out of the wreckage, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I plunged into the darkness of the forest, desperate to escape the carnage. The forest floor was a treacherous maze of tangled roots and fallen branches. I stumbled blindly through the undergrowth, the creatures' howls echoing behind me. I could feel their presence, their eyes burning into my back. I ran for what felt like hours, until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle beneath me. Finally, I collapsed against a massive oak tree, gasping for breath. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me, but for now I was safe. For now, I could catch my breath and try to make sense of the nightmare I had stumbled into. As I sat there, listening to the sounds of the forest, I began to understand. The creatures of Black Lake Forest weren't just scavengers. They were something far more sinister, something ancient and malevolent that had been lurking in the shadows for centuries. They were the guardians of this dark place, and they wouldn't rest until every intruder was silenced. We had trespassed on their territory, and now we were paying the price. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But as I waited for the end, I heard a new sound, a faint, rhythmic drumming, coming from the depths of the forest. It was a tribal beat, primal and hypnotic, filled with a sense of ancient power. And as the drumming grew louder, I realized that I wasn't alone in the forest. There were others here, others who had been fighting these creatures for generations, others who knew the secrets of Black Lake Forest. Hope flickered within me, a tiny spark in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, I could survive this nightmare. Maybe, with the help of these unknown protectors, I could escape the clutches of the creatures of Black Lake Forest. But as I opened my eyes and looked into the darkness, I saw the creatures closing in, their eyes burning with an unholy glee. The drumming grew louder and closer, and as the creatures prepared to strike, I knew that my fight for survival had just begun. The plane crash was just the beginning. Black Lake Forest had claimed us, and it wasn't letting go. The creatures of Black Lake Forest were coming, and they were hungry. The fluorescent lights of Crestwood High always hummed, a low, persistent drone that I'd grown used to over the years. But lately, the hum felt different, sharper, more insistent, like 1,000 tiny voices vibrating just below the threshold of hearing. It was driving me mad. I'm Mark, and I'm the kind of teacher who cares too much. I bleed Crestwood blue and gold. I've seen generations walk these halls, and I genuinely believe in the power of education to shape lives. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. It started subtly. A student, Sarah, zoning out in class, her head twitching sporadically. Then a group of them huddled together in the hallway, their conversations hushed, punctuated by odd, clicking sounds in their throats. I dismissed it initially as teenage weirdness, but it escalated. They started to swarm, literally. Groups of students, moving in unison, their eyes glazed over, their bodies vibrating with that same unsettling hum I heard in the lights. They'd gather in the cafeteria, the library, even during class, their movements synchronized, their faces blank. Attempts to break them up were met with a disturbing lack of recognition, a vacant stare that chilled me to the bone. The worst part was the buzzing. It wasn't the playful banter of teenagers. This was a low, resonant drone that seemed to emanate from within them, a symphony of insectal whispers that made my skin crawl. Last Tuesday, my best friend since kindergarten, Susan, Crestwood's history teacher, came to me, her face etched with worry. "Mark, have you noticed it? The change." Susan was always grounded, rational. To see her this shaken was terrifying. She told me about a group of students she'd seen slip into the basement, the one that was supposed to be off limits, locked since the old boiler room was decommissioned years ago. We tried the door the next day. Locked. That's when I knew. Something was happening down there. Something that explained the madness gripping our school. That night, armed with a crowbar swiped from the janitor's closet, I returned. The air crackled with an unnatural energy as I wrestled the heavy steel door open. The darkness swallowed me whole as I descended the creaking stairs, the air growing thick and heavy, laden with a cloying, sickly sweet smell. The buzzing was deafening now, a constant thrumming that vibrated through my very bones. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the inky blackness. What I saw made my stomach churn. The basement had been transformed. The concrete floor was covered in a thick, viscous substance, glistening under the weak light. Strange, chitinous structures rose from the floor, pulsating rhythmically, their surfaces covered in a network of veins that glowed with an eerie, internal light. And everywhere, the students. They were clustered around these structures, their bodies pressed against them, their eyes closed, their mouths open in silent, ecstatic communion. Their skin had a strange, waxy sheen, and their movements were jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by unseen strings. In the center of the room, dominating the space like some grotesque cathedral, was the hive. It was massive, a pulsating organic structure that reached nearly to the ceiling. It was made of the same chitinous material as the smaller structures, but on a scale that defied comprehension. It throbbed with life, a grotesque heart beating in the darkness, its surface alive with shifting patterns and glistening secretions. And from within the hive, a voice. It was a familiar voice, a voice I'd known and loved for decades, but it was distorted, amplified, overlaid with a buzzing, insectal quality that made my blood run cold. "Mark," the voice whispered, a seductive, honeyed tone that sent shivers down my spine. "Come closer. Join us." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Susan, how could this be? We are creating something beautiful, Mark," the voice continued, laced with an almost unbearable sorrow. "A new harmony, a unity of purpose. You will understand once you are connected, once you are part of the hive." The students began to move, turning towards me with their vacant, unseeing eyes. They shuffled forward, their movements jerky and unnerving, their buzzing growing louder, more insistent. I raised the crowbar, my hand trembling. These weren't my students anymore. They were something else, something alien and terrifying. "Susan," I shouted, my voice cracking with despair. "What have you done?" The hive pulsed again, and the voice, Susan's voice, resonated with a chilling finality. "I have shown them the truth, Mark. The truth about connection, about belonging, about the hive." The students were closing in, their faces blank, their buzzing filling my ears. I swung the crowbar, connecting with a sickening thud against one of the students' heads. The body crumpled to the ground, but the others kept coming, their movements relentless, their eyes fixed on me with unwavering intensity. I fought them off, desperation fueling my every swing. But they were too many. I was weakening, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They swarmed me, their cold, clammy hands reaching for me, their buzzing a deafening roar. As they dragged me towards the hive, I saw Susan, or what was left of her. She was fused with the hive, her body a grotesque extension of the pulsating structure, her eyes wide and vacant, her mouth moving in silent articulation. "Join us, Mark," she whispered, her voice a monstrous echo of the woman I love. "Become one with the hive." They pushed me forward, their hands forcing me towards the pulsating surface of the hive. I could feel its warmth, its life, its insidious connection drawing me in. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. This was it, the end. Crestwood High, the place I dedicated my life to, was now a breeding ground for something unspeakable. But then, a flicker of defiance. A spark of the old Mark, the one who believed in the power of education, the one who refused to surrender. With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched myself free from their grasp and stumbled backward. I swung the crowbar again, this time aiming for the hive itself. The impact sent a shockwave through the basement. The hive shuddered, its pulsating slowed, its light dimmed, the buzzing faltered, and the students around me recoiled, their movements becoming erratic, their eyes flickered with confusion. "No!" Susan's voice screamed, filled with an unholy rage. "You cannot destroy what we have created." I swung again and again, each blow weakening the hive, each strike disrupting its control over the students. The basement was filled with the sounds of cracking chitin and desperate buzzing, a symphony of destruction and despair. Finally, with one last, desperate swing, I struck the hive's core. A deafening roar filled the basement, followed by a blinding flash of light. Then silence. When I opened my eyes, the hive was gone. The basement was dark, silent, and empty. The students were scattered on the floor, unconscious, but seemingly unharmed. I found Susan slumped against the wall, her eyes closed, her face pale. She was breathing, but barely. I don't know what happens next. I carried Susan out of the basement and called for help while I waited with the students for the ambulance and police to arrive. Explaining everything to the authorities was a nightmare, of course, but they listened. I can still hear the buzzing, sometimes, especially when the fluorescent lights hum. I don't know how much of the hive remains, or if the children that were connected to it will ever be the same. I don't know if Susan will ever recover, or if I'll ever forget the horrors I witnessed in that basement. All I know is that I did what I could. I fought for my students, for my friend, for the soul of Crestwood High. And in the end, I hope I made a difference. I just hope it's enough. I fear one day, the hive will call again, and I'll be there, ready to answer. The damp chill hit me first, a clammy hand on the back of my neck, even before I saw it. It was late, past midnight, and I was fumbling for my keys in the dim hallway light of my apartment building. That's when I saw it, a new staircase, wedged between Mrs. Henderson's floral wallpaper door and the eternally flickering fluorescent panel. It wasn't just the intrusion that was jarring. It was the sheer impossibility of it. This building, a pre-war behemoth on the Upper West Side, was solid. Brick and mortar, steel beams and concrete guts. Where had this staircase materialized from? My heart did a nervous little jig. I'd lived here for 15 years, paid an ungodly rent for the privilege of creaky floors and unpredictable plumbing, and I knew this building like the back of my hand. There was no space for another staircase. It was made of dark wood, the kind that looked expensive and ominous. The grain swirled like disturbed water, and each step seemed to groan softly, even without my weight. Curiosity, that insidious human trait, gnawed at me. I had to see where it led. With a deep breath, I started climbing. The air grew colder with each step, the silence amplifying the creak of the wood under my worn leather boots. The hallway outside my apartment faded below, replaced by the unsettling echo of my own breathing. Finally, I reached the top, and my blood ran cold. It was my floor, or a near-perfect replica. The same faded wallpaper, the same flickering fluorescent light, the same threadbare rug runner hugging the hallway. But there was something terribly, horribly wrong. Every tenant on the floor was frozen, not in a playful mannequin challenge kind of way, but locked in a state of utter primal terror. Mr. Goldstein, the retired accountant, was caught mid-stride, his briefcase suspended in the air, his face contorted in a silent scream. Mrs. Rodriguez, always impeccably dressed, was clawing at her throat, her eyes wide with unimaginable horror. Even old grumpy Mr. Abernathy, who never showed emotion beyond a perpetual scowl, was frozen in a posture of slack-jawed fear. Their screams were silent, but palpable. I could feel the echoes of their terror clinging to the air, a thick, suffocating blanket of dread. Their faces, their rigid postures, told a story of unspeakable horror. I stumbled back down the staircase, my legs shaking uncontrollably. I didn't stop until I was back in my own apartment, the familiar, comforting clutter a stark contrast to the horrifying tableau I had just witnessed. I slammed the door shut, bolted the locks, and huddled against the wall. The image of frozen faces seared into my mind. I told myself it was a nightmare, a bizarre hallucination brought on by stress and late-night pizza. But the lingering chill in the air and the subtle creak of the new staircase that I could still hear through the wall told me otherwise. Sleep was impossible. I spent the rest of the night listening to the building breathe. The creaks and groans that were usually a symphony of comforting familiarity, now a soundtrack to my growing paranoia. The next morning, I cautiously opened my door. The staircase was still there, solid, real, and utterly terrifying. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? "Officer, there's a new staircase that leads to a frozen dimension of screaming people." They'd lock me up faster than you could say rubber room. So I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I ignored it. I went to work, trying to focus on spreadsheets and conference calls, but the image of those frozen faces kept flashing in my mind. I told myself it wasn't real, a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. But when I returned home that evening, the nightmare had escalated. Not only was the original staircase still there, but now a second one had appeared, this one wedged between my door and the door of my neighbor, Sarah, the struggling artist. It was identical to the first, the same dark wood, the same swirling grain, the same unsettling chill emanating from its depths. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't random. It was spreading, like a disease. I didn't dare go up the new staircase. I didn't want to know what awaited me on the other side. But I knew with chilling certainty that I was running out of time. Days turned into nights, each one more terrifying than the last. The staircases multiplied. Now, there was one between every apartment door on my floor, a silent, wooden invasion. The building was changing. The once familiar sounds were muted, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I saw fewer and fewer of my neighbors. Some had probably moved out, driven away by the oppressive atmosphere. Others, I didn't want to think about the others. I started barricading my door, piling furniture against it, driven by a desperate, irrational need to protect myself. I knew it wouldn't stop whatever was happening, but it was the only thing I could think of to do. Then, one morning, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of wood scraping against the wall. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. The scraping continued, growing louder, closer. I knew what was happening. My floor was next. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed a hammer from my toolbox, the only weapon I could find, and pressed myself against the wall, waiting. The scraping stopped. Then, a crack appeared in the plaster, followed by a splintering sound. The wall bulged inward, and with a final, earth-shattering crash, the staircase burst through, filling the space between my bed and my closet. It was here, in my apartment. I stared at it, my mind numb with terror. The dark wood gleamed in the dim morning light, the swirling grain seeming to writhe like living things. The chill emanating from it was almost unbearable. I knew, without a doubt, that if I climbed those stairs, I would find myself frozen, locked in a silent scream, a permanent resident of that horrifying other world. But I also knew that I couldn't stay here. The staircases were multiplying, consuming the building. Eventually, they would reach my apartment. I would be trapped, a prisoner in my own home, waiting for the inevitable. So I made a choice. I took a deep breath, gripped the hammer tightly, and stepped onto the first step. The cold was immediate, bone-chilling. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I could feel the silent screams all around me, pressing against my sanity. I climbed higher, my legs moving almost mechanically. I didn't look up. I didn't want to see what awaited me at the top. But I knew that when I reached the top of the staircase, I would find myself face to face with my own frozen scream. and I knew that I was already too late. The air in the warehouse hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from dust motes and the scent of decay. It was past midnight, and the only illumination came from the harsh spotlights that sliced through the gloom, focusing on the makeshift stage. I shouldn't have come. I knew at the moment I saw the invitation, a stark black card with silver, almost Gothic lettering, the mannequin auction, private viewing only. My curiosity, a morbid fascination with the strange and macabre, had overruled my better judgment. The auctioneer, a gaunt man with eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, surveyed the small crowd. We were a motley crew, a collection of antique dealers, eccentric collectors, and those like myself, drawn by the allure of the forbidden. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Tonight, we offer you the unique opportunity to acquire art, beauty perhaps, or something else entirely." The first few mannequins were unremarkable vintage department store dummies, their paint chipped and limbs slightly askew. They fetched decent prices, mostly from those looking for quirky display pieces. Then they brought out it. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Tall and slender, it was sculpted with an unnerving realism. The face was hauntingly beautiful, with porcelain skin and eyes that seemed to hold a spark of something. It was dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, and its hands were clasped delicately in front of it. There was a disconcerting stillness to it, a complete lack of artifice. It didn't look like a mannequin. It looked like a woman frozen in time. I was mesmerized. I felt an unreasonable, almost primal urge to possess it. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing its supposed provenance: a forgotten atelier in Vienna, a mysterious collector, rumors of strange occurrences. I barely heard him. I was lost in the depths of its eyes. The bidding started low, but quickly escalated. I found myself caught up in the frenzy, my hand shooting up again and again. The number of bidders dwindled until it was just me and an older woman with a severe expression and too much jewelry. Finally, she dropped out, shaking her head as if disgusted with herself. "Going once, going twice sold," to the gentleman in the corner. A wave of exhilaration washed over me, quickly followed by a prickle of unease. As the warehouse workers wheeled the mannequin towards my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. The drive home was uneventful, but I felt the mannequin's presence in the back of the truck, an unsettling weight in the darkness. I lived alone in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a place filled with shadows and echoing silences. I lugged the mannequin inside, struggling with its awkward weight. Finally, I propped it up in the corner of my bedroom, facing the foot of my bed. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I tossed and turned, the mannequin's silent gaze boring into me from across the room. I told myself it was just the light playing tricks, that my imagination was running wild. But the feeling of being watched persisted, a constant, gnawing unease. The next morning, I woke with a jolt. A cold weight pressed against my shoulder. I gasped, and my eyes flew open. The mannequin's hand rested on my shoulder, its porcelain fingers cold and stiff. I recoiled, scrambling back against the headboard. My heart hammered in my chest. It had moved, couldn't have moved. I was dreaming. I had to be dreaming. I sat there for a long time, staring at the mannequin, willing it to remain still. It stood silent, impassive, its eyes fixed on some distant point beyond my head. I forced myself to get out of bed, telling myself it was a bizarre hallucination, a trick of the subconscious. I spent the day avoiding my bedroom, trying to distract myself with work, but the image of the mannequin's hand on my shoulder haunted me. As soon as darkness fell, the dread returned, tenfold. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the phone rang. I hesitated, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you enjoy your purchase?" The auctioneer's voice rasped on the other end of the line. "What do you want?" I demanded, my hand trembling. "Souls only," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Final bid. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my blood running cold. I knew with chilling certainty that this was no ordinary mannequin. It was something else, something ancient and hungry. The following days were a living nightmare. The mannequin moved more frequently now. I would find it in different positions, its head tilted at a different angle, its hands rearranged. Sometimes, I would catch glimpses of it in the periphery of my vision, a fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye. The phone calls continued every night, the auctioneer's voice a constant, chilling reminder of the fate that awaited me. Souls only. Final bid. I tried everything to get rid of it. I attempted to sell it, but no one wanted it. They felt the same unease I did, the sense of something deeply wrong. I tried to destroy it, but it was impervious to any force I could muster. Hammers bounced harmlessly off its porcelain skin. Saws wouldn't leave a scratch. It was as if it were protected by some unseen force. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, haunted by the silent, watchful presence of the mannequin. My sleep became fitful and plagued by nightmares, visions of shadowy figures and endless auctions. My sanity began to fray at the edges. Tonight is the worst. I woke to find the mannequin standing directly over me, its shadow looming large in the dim light. His cold breath brushed against my face. I could smell the faint scent of decay, the dust of centuries. I haven't slept. I'm writing this now, knowing that I'm running out of time. The auctioneer will call again tonight. I can feel it. I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I don't want to die, but I can feel it sucking the life out of me, draining me dry. The phone is ringing. It's time for the final bid. The silence of the Havenwood Library was usually a balm, a thick, comforting blanket I wrapped myself in every day. But tonight, the silence was a razor, a taut wire humming with an unbearable, unseen energy. I'd worked here for 15 years, cataloging, shelving, and breathing in the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. I considered myself immune to the building's eccentricities, the drafts that whispered through the stacks, the occasional book that seemed to move on its own. But lately, things had shifted. The whispers had become louder, tinged with a distinct, chilling anguish. And the books, well, they'd started to scream. It began subtly, a faint rustling like mice scurrying in the walls. Then a higher pitch, a keening that resonated deep within my bones. I'd initially dismissed it as the old building settling, the pipes groaning under pressure. But it grew, escalating into a chorus of choked cries, desperate pleas trapped within the brittle pages of forgotten volumes. I was the only one who seemed to hear it. My colleagues, bless their oblivious hearts, chalked it up to my overactive imagination and the stress of the upcoming renovation. The screaming was unsettling enough, but then it appeared. I arrived one morning to find a book on my desk, nestled amongst the overdue notices and interlibrary loan requests. It was bound in what looked like human skin, stretched taut and scarred with indecipherable symbols. The title, embossed in tarnished silver, sent a shiver down my spine. A Night of Evil. I should have locked it away. I should have called the authorities, reported it as a potential biohazard. But curiosity, that insidious serpent, coiled around my good sense. I opened the book. The pages were filled with a spidery script in a language I didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. It detailed a ritual, a summoning, a promise of unimaginable power and unspeakable horror. Each chapter chronicled the signs of its coming, a slow creep of dread that would culminate in a single, cataclysmic night. I spent hours poring over the text, my breath catching in my throat with each horrifying revelation. The book spoke of a creature born of shadow and despair, a being that fed on fear and thrived on suffering. It described the specific conditions for its arrival: a blood moon, a convergence of ley lines, and a willing participant, a vessel for its darkness. The penultimate chapter ended with a chilling prophecy. When the clock strikes midnight and the veil thins, the evil will walk amongst you. The screams will be music, the blood will be wine, and the flesh will be its feast. Then I turned the page. The final chapter was written in English, And the handwriting, it was mine. But it wasn't just the script. The ink was thick, clotted, unmistakably blood. The words swam before my eyes, a nightmarish reflection of my own deepest fears. "The vessel is ready," it read. "The time is at hand. I will open the gate." I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was a prank, a cruel joke orchestrated by someone who knew me, who understood my fears and insecurities, someone who wanted to drive me mad. I tried to dismiss it to find a rational explanation. Perhaps I'd sleepwalked, written it in a fugue state. Perhaps the book was a prop from some elaborate performance art piece, left behind by a mischievous patron. But deep down, I knew the truth. The book was not a joke. It was a warning. I spent the next day in a frenzy of research, desperately trying to find a way to stop what was coming. I consulted ancient texts, scoured forgotten grimoires, searching for a counterspell, a ward, anything that could banish the evil that threatened to consume us all. The library, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in, the screaming books a constant reminder of the impending doom. I could feel the energy in the air, a palpable tension that crackled with malevolence. The other librarians, oblivious as ever, just shook their heads and offered me herbal tea. As dusk settled, casting long, ominous shadows across the library floor, I knew I was running out of time. The blood moon was rising, painting the sky in hues of crimson and violet. I could feel the ley lines converging beneath the building, a network of unseen energy throbbing with dark potential. I barricaded myself in the rare books room, surrounded by ancient tomes and protective sigils I'd hastily drawn on the floor with chalk. I clutched a silver crucifix in one hand and a dog-eared copy of the Necronomicon in the other, a pathetic arsenal against the horrors to come. Then the clock tower began to chime. Each clang of the bell echoed through the library, each strike a hammer blow against my resolve. With the final chime, a wave of icy air swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. The screaming intensified, rising to a deafening crescendo. It was no longer just the books. It was the building itself, the very stones groaning in agony. A guttural growl filled the air, followed by the scraping of claws on stone. Something was moving in the shadows, something large and impossibly wrong. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold it. As the beam flickered to life, it illuminated a grotesque figure. Standing in the doorway, it was tall and gaunt, its flesh stretched taut over bone, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. Its limbs were elongated and twisted, ending in razor-sharp claws that dripped with an oily, black substance. But the most horrifying thing was its face. It was a distorted mockery of a human face, its features twisted into a rictus of eternal pain. And on its forehead, branded into its flesh, was the symbol from the cover of the book. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched, its growls turning into a triumphant roar. I screamed, a primal sound of terror that echoed through the library. I threw the crucifix, a desperate act of faith, but it bounced harmlessly off the creature's chest. It was upon me now, its foul breath hot on my face, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, something strange happened. The creature hesitated. It tilted its head, its burning eyes widening in confusion. It reached out not to attack, but to touch my face. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature's gaze was no longer malevolent, but searching, almost pleading. Then it spoke. Its voice was a rasping whisper, a tortured echo of something human. "Help me," it croaked. "I don't want to be here." I stared at the creature, my mind reeling. This wasn't a monster. It was a prisoner, trapped in a nightmare of its own making. Then I understood. The book hadn't been a warning. It had been a cry for help. I hadn't been chosen to open the gate. I had been chosen to close it. The final chapter, written in my blood, wasn't a declaration of evil. It was a desperate plea for salvation. The creature needed me to undo what had been done, to break the ritual, to send it back to the abyss from whence it came. I looked around the room, my eyes searching for the answer. They landed on the Necronomicon, still clutched in my hand. The book was a dangerous tool, but it also contained the knowledge I needed. I opened the book, ignoring the screaming voices that clawed at my sanity. I found the counterspell, a complex incantation that required a sacrifice, a willing offering of something precious. My blood. I didn't hesitate. I took a shard of glass from a broken window and slashed my palm, letting the blood drip onto the floor, forming a circle around the creature and myself. Then I began to chant. The words were ancient and powerful, resonating with a force that shook the very foundations of the library. The air crackled with energy, the shadows danced, and the screaming intensified, threatening to overwhelm me. The creature watched me, its eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. As I reached the climax of the incantation, a beam of pure white light erupted from the center of the circle, engulfing the creature in its radiant embrace. The creature screamed, a sound of pure agony and release. Then, it began to dissolve, its form flickering and fading until it was nothing more than a wisp of smoke. The light vanished, the screaming subsided, and the library fell silent. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted and bleeding, but alive. The night of evil was over. In the days that followed, the library returned to normal. The screaming stopped, the drafts ceased, and the unsettling energy dissipated. My colleagues attributed my strange behavior to stress and overwork, and I didn't try to correct them. The night of evil was my secret, a nightmare I would carry with me for the rest of my days. But I knew I had done the right thing. I had saved the library, and perhaps even saved myself. I never saw the book again. It vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving behind only the faint memory of its horrifying contents. But sometimes, late at night, when the silence of the library becomes too profound, I can still hear a whisper, a faint echo of a creature trapped between worlds, a creature I helped to set free. And in that whisper, I hear not terror, but gratitude. The brochure promised serenity, a tranquil escape. Lakewood, nestled between the whispering sea and the ancient, brooding forest, was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to reconnect with nature and, more importantly, with my friends. Me, Mike, Jason, Angel, Hope, and Deborah, a tight-knit group since college, deserved this after years of navigating the jagged edges of adulthood. My summer house, a weathered cabin built by my grandfather, was the perfect setting. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, warming the wood-paneled walls. During the day, we hiked through the forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sun bleed into the ocean, the rhythmic crash of the waves a soothing soundtrack. The first few days were idyllic. We laughed, shared stories, and rekindled the bonds that life had threatened to fray. But a disquiet started to simmer beneath the surface of our tranquility, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. It was subtle, a flicker in the corner of my eye, a whisper in the wind that seemed to carry a chilling undertone. Then came the screaming. It started late one night, the kind of deep, guttural scream that clawed its way through the dense forest and sent shivers down our spines. It was raw, animalistic, filled with a terror so profound it felt tangible. We huddled together inside the cabin, the cheerful glow of the fireplace now casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls, amplifying our fear. "What was that?" Hope whispered, her voice trembling. Jason, ever the pragmatist, tried to reassure us. "Probably just an animal. Fox, maybe. They can make some pretty awful noises." But none of us truly believed him. The scream had felt different, human almost. The next morning, the forest felt different too. The air was heavy, charged with an unsettling energy. The birds were silent, and the usual cheerful buzz of insects was absent. We tried to ignore the feeling, to chalk it up to nerves, but the tension was palpable. That afternoon, Deborah insisted on taking a walk alone. She claimed she needed some space to clear her head. We argued, pleaded with her to stay, but she was adamant. "I'll be fine," she said, forcing a smile. "I just need some fresh air." She didn't come back. As darkness descended, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and angry red, our fear morphed into panic. We armed ourselves with flashlights and kitchen knives and ventured into the forest. The undergrowth snagged at our clothes. The branches clawed at our faces. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of our hearts. We found her near a clearing, a place where the trees grew unnaturally close together, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers. The air here was thick with a cloying, nauseating sweetness that made our stomachs churn. And then we saw it. The tree. It wasn't just any tree. It was ancient, its gnarled trunk thicker than any I had ever seen. But what truly horrified us was what adorned its branches. Skins. Human skins, stretched and dried, hung from the tree like grotesque ornaments. They swayed gently in the breeze, rustling with a macabre whisper. Each one was different, male, female, young, old, a tapestry of suffering woven from the flesh of the lost. And then we saw Deborah. Her skin was gone. Her raw, bloodied muscle tissue glistened in the moonlight. Her eyes were wide with a frozen terror, staring blankly at the sky. She was still alive, but barely. A low, guttural moan escaped her lips, a sound that echoed the scream we had heard the night before. We stood there, paralyzed by horror, unable to move, unable to breathe. The sweet, sickening smell intensified, filling our lungs, poisoning our minds. Mike was the first to break the silence. He screamed, a primal, unhinged sound that mirrored Deborah's earlier cries. He charged towards the tree, brandishing his knife, a desperate, futile attempt to avenge our friend. But he didn't get far. A figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette that seemed to coalesce from the darkness itself. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its face was obscured by shadows, but we could see the gleam of its eyes, two pinpricks of malevolent intelligence. It moved with a speed that defied human capabilities, a blur of motion that ended with Mike crumpling to the ground, a gaping wound in his chest. Panic seized us. We turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, the image of the tree of skins seared into our minds. We didn't stop until we reached the cabin, locking the doors, barricading the windows, huddling together in a desperate attempt to ward off the evil that hunted us. But we knew it was coming. We could hear it outside, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the soft, rhythmic drag of its feet on the forest floor. It was circling the cabin, like a predator stalking its prey. Jason, his face pale with fear, grabbed my grandfather's old hunting rifle. He fumbled with the cartridges, his hands shaking so badly he could barely load the weapon. "We have to fight," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have to try." Hope, her eyes wide with terror, clutched Angel's hand. "There's no point," she sobbed. "We're going to die." As I looked around at my friends, at the faces I had known and loved for so long, I felt a wave of despair wash over me. We had come here seeking peace, seeking connection. Instead, we had stumbled upon something ancient, something evil, something that would consume us all. The scratching at the door started, a slow, deliberate sound that sent shivers down our spines. It was testing our defenses, probing for weakness. Then, with a sickening crack, the door splintered. The figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the darkness. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light. Its lips peeled back in a silent snarl, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. It raised a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, and beckoned us forward. We knew what it wanted, fresh skins for its tree. As it lunged, the scream that tore from my throat was the same one that had echoed through the forest just days before. The scream of pure, unadulterated terror, the scream of the damned. The serenity of Lakewood was a lie. The forest held a secret, a dark and terrible truth that would forever haunt my final moments. The tree of skins had claimed its due, and we were its harvest. The first time I noticed it, I dismissed it as quaint, another quirk of living in Havenwood. Good morning, Mrs. Abernathy chirped, her face crinkling with a smile as she watered her petunias. Lovely day, lovely day. It was charming in a folksy, small-town kind of way. Then Mr. Peterson at the hardware store did it. Need something? Need something? He asked, his voice a low rumble. Even the children playing in the park echoed each other, their joyous shouts bouncing off the oak trees. Tag, you're it. Tag, you're it. It became the rhythm of Havenwood, the soundtrack to my new life after inheriting my grandmother's house. I'd left the city seeking peace and quiet, and Havenwood, with its echoing inhabitants, certainly offered a unique brand of it. Days bled into weeks, and the echo grew less charming, more unsettling. It was like living in a perpetual loop, a broken record stuck on repeat. I found myself consciously avoiding conversations, dreading the inevitable duplication. How are you? How are you? The postman would ask, and I'd offer a curt nod, grabbing my mail and retreating inside. Then came the day that shattered the familiar rhythm, the day the echo became a chilling premonition. I was making coffee, humming a tuneless melody. Morning, morning, I mumbled half to myself. But the echo wasn't my echo. It was deeper, raspy, laced with a fear that sent shivers down my spine. She's here. She's here. I froze, every nerve on high alert. I whirled around, scanning the kitchen, searching for any sign of intrusion. But the room was empty, bathed in the soft morning light. The only sound was the gentle hiss of the coffee maker. She's here. She's here. The echo repeated, fainter this time, a ghostly whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of adjusting to small-town life was getting to me. But the dread lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. I spent the day on edge, jumping at shadows, convinced I was being watched. That evening, as I walked home from the library, the streetlights casting elongated, distorted shadows, I felt it, presence, a weight behind me moving in perfect synchronization. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. There, a few feet behind me, was a woman. She was dressed in a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. But it wasn't her appearance that terrified me. It was her face, or rather, the absence of one. Where her mouth should have been, there was only smooth, unbroken skin. No lips, no teeth, no tongue. Just an unnerving blankness. And her eyes, they were wide, vacant, filled with an ancient, unknowable sorrow. She mirrored my every step, her movements precise and unervingly perfect. If I slowed, she slowed. If I turned, she turned. She was a reflection, a distorted echo made flesh. Panic clawed at my throat. I broke into a run, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The woman kept pace, her silent form a constant, terrifying presence at my heels. I reached my house, fumbling with the keys, desperate to get inside. I slammed the door shut, locking it and bolting it, as if flimsy wood and metal could keep her out. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for any sign of her. Silence, but I knew she was there. I could feel her presence, a cold weight on the other side of the wood. Days turned into a nightmare. I was trapped in my own home, a prisoner of the silent woman. Every time I ventured outside, she was there, mirroring my every move, a constant reminder of the terrifying echo. I tried to talk to people, to tell them what was happening, but they just stared at me with vacant eyes, repeating my words back to me. She's here. She's here. I'd say, desperate for someone to understand. She's here. She's here. They would echo, their voices flat and emotionless. I was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. Driven to the brink of madness, I decided to confront her. I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve, but I couldn't live like this any longer. I had to know why she was here, what she wanted. I opened the door and stepped outside. She was waiting, a silent statue in the twilight. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. Silence. I took a step forward, then another. She mirrored my movements, her vacant eyes fixed on mine. "What do you want?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. Still, she remained silent. Then I saw it, a flicker of something in her eyes. A spark of recognition, a glimmer of understanding. I reached out my hand, hesitant, terrified. She didn't flinch. Slowly, tentatively, she raised her hand and placed it in mine. Her skin was cold, clammy, like touching death itself. And then, the echo returned, stronger than ever before. But this time, it wasn't just repeating my words. It was speaking for her. "Help us?" The echo whispered, the voice raspy and filled with anguish. "We're trapped. She's trapped." "Who is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She's the silent one," the echo replied. "The one who remembers. The one who knows the truth." The truth? What truth? What were these echoing people? These silent horrors that haunted Havenwood? The echo continued, its voice growing stronger, more desperate. She saw what happened. She tried to warn them, but they silenced her. They took her voice. I looked at the woman's blank face, at the smooth, unbroken skin where her mouth should have been. A horrifying realization dawned on me. This wasn't a haunting. It was a silencing, a cover-up. The echo spoke again. "They all repeat, 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 so they won't remember the truth. Break the cycle. Free her. Free us all." And then, just as suddenly as it began, the echo stopped. The woman remained, her hands still in mine, her eyes still vacant. I knew what I had to do. I had to find out what happened to her, what she had witnessed, what truth they were trying to bury. I had to break the cycle of repetition and expose the secrets of Havenwood, even if it meant facing the darkness that lurked beneath its charming facade. The woman with no mouth squeezed my hand, a silent plea for help. And for the first time since arriving in Havenwood, I felt a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. The echoes may have tried to silence the truth, but they had also led me to it. And I wouldn't let them bury it again, not without a fight. The clock struck 12, the sound resonating through the silent house like a death knell. I gripped the worn armchair, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was time, again. For the past month, every single night, without fail, the pale boy arrived. Tap, tap, tap. 3 gentle knocks, yet they held a power that could freeze the blood in my veins. He was there on my porch, waiting. I knew without looking. I always knew. Gathering what little courage I could muster, I peered through the peephole. There he was, the boy. He couldn't have been older than 7, dressed in a perpetually dusty, oversized coat that swallowed his thin frame. His hair, the color of dried straw, was plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes. Those were the things that haunted my waking hours and plagued my dreams. They were wide, unervingly so, like saucers reflecting the dim porch light, a chilling shade of blue that seemed to absorb all light, leaving only a vacant, bottomless pit. And they never blinked, not once. "Have you seen him?" he'd ask, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to slither under the door and into my mind. "Have you seen Buster? He's lost." I'd shake my head, my own voice caught in my throat, a strangled sound lost in the night. I'd close the door, lock it, and then retreat into the safety of my living room, willing the night to pass. It had started subtly, a scratching at the door, a faint whimper in the wind. I dismissed it as my imagination, the old house playing tricks on me. But then the boy appeared, and the scratching turned into desperate pleading. Yesterday, things escalated. While tending to my small garden, I unearthed something. Buried beneath the wilting rose bushes, tangled in the roots, was a dog collar, leather old and cracked, but still legible. I brushed the dirt away, my fingers tracing the engraved name. My name, Arthur, it read. Arthur Miller. The blood drained from my face. My breath hitched in my throat. I stumbled back, the collar falling from my numb fingers. Couldn't be. Simply couldn't be. I hadn't owned a dog in years. Not since. Memories, long buried, clawed their way to the surface. Fragments of a childhood I thought I had successfully erased. A dog, a loyal, playful companion named Buster, and me, a child, filled with a joy that seemed a lifetime away. But there was something else, something darker lurking in the shadows of those memories. A feeling of unease, of something terribly wrong. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking was louder now, more insistent. Panic seized me, a cold, suffocating wave. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't ignore the truth that was pounding against the walls of my sanity. I crept towards the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each creak amplifying the dread in my heart. What was I going to say? What could I possibly say? I opened the door. The boy stood there, bathed in the eerie glow of the porch light, his unblinking eyes fixed on mine, boring into my very soul. "Have you seen him, Arthur?" He whispered, his voice closer, more demanding than before. "Have you seen Buster? He wants to come home." My tongue felt thick, useless. I couldn't speak. I could only stare back at him, at those vacant, accusing eyes. He tilted his head, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down my spine. "You remember him, don't you, Arthur?" A single tear escaped my eye, tracing a path down my weathered cheek. The memories flooded back, overwhelming me with their raw, untainted horror. I remembered Buster, my beloved dog, disappearing one summer afternoon. I remembered the frantic search, the desperate calls, the growing despair. And then, I remembered the small, rusty shovel I had hidden in the shed. I remembered the freshly turned earth in the back of the garden. I remembered the awful, guilty secret I had buried deep within myself, a secret I had tried to forget for decades. The boy pointed a finger, a skeletal digit accusingly aimed at my chest. "You hurt him, Arthur. You made him disappear." I finally found my voice, a hoarse whisper that barely escaped my lips. I didn't mean to." His eyes widened further, if that was even possible. A strange glint appeared in their depths, a spark of something that resembled anger. "He misses you, Arthur," the boy said, his voice taking on a chillingly sweet tone. "He wants to play, forever." The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble. A low growl, guttural and menacing, echoed from the darkness behind the boy. I could feel it, a presence, a malevolent force that was drawing closer. "Come on, Arthur," the boy urged, holding out a pale, impossibly thin hand. "Buster's waiting." I looked at his hand, then back at those unblinking eyes. I knew what I had to do. I had to face the truth, the consequences of my actions. I had to confront the darkness that had been festering within me for so long. I reached out and took his hand. His grip was cold like ice. As soon as our skin touched, the world around me dissolved. The porch, the house, the familiar comfort of my surroundings vanished. I was plunged into a swirling vortex of darkness, a chaotic abyss filled with whispers and shadows. The growling grew louder, closer. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck, the presence of something large and powerful looming behind me. Then I saw him, Buster, but not the Buster I remembered. This was a twisted, grotesque mockery of my beloved companion. His fur was matted and decaying. His eyes were hollow sockets filled with an unholy light. His teeth were bared in a silent snarl, dripping with a dark, viscous fluid. He lunged. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of pain, I felt acceptance. A strange sense of peace washed over me as I succumbed to the darkness. I had finally come home. Now, I stand on the porch, bathed in the eerie glow of the porch light. My coat, dusty and oversized, swallows my thin frame. My hair, the color of dried straw, is plastered to my forehead. And my eyes, they are wide, unnervingly so, a chilling shade of blue that never blinks. Tap, tap, tap. I knock gently on the door. "Have you seen him?" I whisper, my voice a raspy sound that slithers under the door and into the mind of the soul inside. "Have you seen Buster? He's lost." And I wait, because Buster always finds his way home. The attic dust tickled my nose, sending me into a fit of sneezes. Sunlight, fractured by the grime-coated window, illuminated floating particles, making the air seem thick enough to choke on. I was on a mission, a nostalgic excavation into my childhood home, now inherited and desperately needing a clear out. It was behind a stack of moth-eaten quilts that I found it. A heavy, oak box, its surface intricately carved with symbols that looked vaguely Celtic, though my knowledge of ancient cultures was limited to poorly remembered history classes. Curiosity, that insatiable beast, roared to life. I wrestled the box free and lugged it downstairs, the wood groaning in protest. Inside, nestled in faded velvet lining, was a board game unlike any I had ever seen. The board itself was a circular disc of polished obsidian, etched with more of those unsettling symbols. There were no dice, no cards, just coils of crimson string, thick as yarn, meticulously arranged in a pattern of concentric circles. Instead of game pieces, there were 5 small silver tokens, each shaped like a different animal: a raven, a wolf, a stag, a fox, and a serpent. A handwritten note, brittle with age, lay on top. The game of red strings. Handle with care. Play with intent. A shiver traced its way down my spine. It was ludicrous, but the air around the box seemed to crackle with a strange energy. I scoffed at my own superstition. It was just a game, probably some forgotten family heirloom. Still, the allure was undeniable. I decided to invite my 4 closest friends, Jane, Joy, Jessica, and Joan the J Sisters, as I affectionately and sometimes sarcastically called them up for a weekend getaway at the old house. A little wine, some catching up, and maybe, just maybe, a playful foray into the mysterious game of red strings. The evening arrived, filled with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. The air was thick with the comforting aroma of garlic and rosemary from the roast chicken I'd prepared. After dinner, I presented the game, its ominous aura somewhat diminished by the jovial atmosphere. "What is this? Some kind of mystical Ouija board?" Jessica asked, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Something like that, I guess," I replied, trying to downplay my own growing sense of unease. "Found it in the attic. Thought it might be a fun, albeit weird, way to spend the evening." They were all intrigued. We gathered around the obsidian board, the crimson strings gleaming under the lamplight. Following the cryptic note, we each chose a silver token, letting our intuition guide us. I chose the raven, Jane the wolf, Joy the stag, Jessica the fox, and Joan, predictably, the serpent. After a moment of silence, I read the instructions etched on the bottom of the box. Each player chooses a string to represent a desire, a fear, or a secret they wish to confront. Connect your token to the center of the board with your chosen string. Speak your intent aloud before drawing the string taut. We exchanged nervous glances. This was definitely more involved than Monopoly, but the combination of wine and morbid curiosity was too potent to resist. One by one, we chose our strings and declared our intentions. Jane, ever the career-driven one, confessed a deep-seated fear of failure. Joy, recently divorced, voiced her desire for true love. Jessica, a closet writer, admitted her secret ambition to publish a novel. Joan, the most enigmatic of us all, simply stated her intent to understand her purpose. I, haunted by the recent loss of my father, expressed a desire to find peace. As each of us spoke, the crimson strings seemed to thrum with an almost imperceptible vibration. When all 5 strings were connected, the room fell silent. The air grew heavy, charged with an unsettling energy. My skin prickled with goosebumps. "Okay," I said, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "That's enough weirdness for one night. Let's put this away." No one argued. We packed the game back into its oak box and retreated to the living room, determined to banish the strange feeling with more wine and mindless television. That night, I had the most disturbing dream. I was lost in a labyrinth of crimson threads, the strings tightening around me, suffocating me. I could hear the whispers of my friends, their voices distorted and echoing, filled with a terror that mirrored my own. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding against my ribs. The room was dark, silent except for the gentle creaking of the old house settling. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something strange. Crimson threads, They were everywhere, woven around my wrists, my ankles, snaking across the floor and disappearing under the door. I tried to sit up, but the strings held me fast, binding me to the bed. Panic clawed at my throat. I thrashed against the restraints, but the strings only tightened, biting into my skin. I could feel the subtle vibrations again, the same unsettling energy that had permeated the air around the game. Then I heard it, a low, guttural hum, resonating from the darkness beyond the bedroom door. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, a sound that spoke of ancient things and unspeakable horrors. Suddenly, the door creaked open, revealing a sliver of inky blackness. The humming intensified, and I felt a pull, a relentless force drawing me towards the opening. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. I looked around wildly, searching for help. That's when I saw them. Jane, Joy, Jessica, and Joan. They were all entangled in the crimson threads, their faces contorted in expressions of silent terror. We were all being pulled, inexorably, towards the dark abyss. The humming grew louder, morphing into a chorus of whispers, too faint to understand, yet pregnant with menace. The crimson strings tightened further, cutting into our flesh. I could feel my strength waning, my resistance crumbling. Then a flicker of memory. The note, play with intent. What had we intended? To confront our fears, our desires, our secrets. But what if the game didn't just confront them, but amplified them, twisted them into something monstrous? I focused all my will, channeling my desperate desire for peace, for solace from my grief. I pictured my father's face, his kind eyes, his gentle smile. I held onto that image with every fiber of my being, fighting against the relentless pull of the darkness. Slowly, agonizingly, the humming began to subside. The crimson strings loosened their grip, the vibrations fading into a faint tremor. The inky blackness beyond the door seemed to recede, shrinking back into the shadows. Finally, with a gasp, the pull released me. I collapsed back onto the bed, my body trembling, my heart hammering in my chest. The crimson threads still clung to me, but they were no longer constricting. They were simply there. I looked at my friends. Jane, Joy, Jessica, and Joan were still tangled in the strings, their eyes wide with shock. But the terror in their faces was slowly giving way to understanding. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, picking apart the crimson threads and sharing our experiences. We talked about our fears, our desires, and our secrets, no longer as abstract concepts, but as tangible forces that could bind us or set us free. The game of red strings was still in the oak box. In the morning, we went up to the attic and burned the game along with the oak box. The heat was hot enough to burn the memories away. We never spoke of it again, except in hushed whispers in the dead of night. But we all knew the game of red strings hadn't been just a game. It had been a gateway, a conduit to something ancient and powerful. And me, the J sisters, had unwittingly opened the door. The screen flickered, the low battery icon a mocking grin in the dim light of the living room. I ignored it, tapping furiously at the screen. Nearly there, I muttered, my thumb aching from the relentless swiping. Around me, pizza boxes lay scattered like fallen comrades, and the air hung thick with the stale scent of energy drinks and nervous sweat. It was the third hour of our marathon Call of Demons session. Just one more wave, guys. Let's finish this damn thing. I yelled, my voice hoarse. Call of Demons was the latest mobile gaming craze. A deceptively simple game with a surprisingly addictive loop. You and a squad of players, up to 20 in our case, fought off waves of increasingly difficult demons. The graphics were decent, the gameplay responsive, and the community surprisingly robust. We'd all downloaded it a few weeks ago and formed a tight-knit group, coordinating strategies and boasting or lamenting our scores. Tonight was our attempt to finally conquer the highest difficulty level. There were 20 of us crammed into Mark's spacious house. Mark, the tech guru, always had the latest gadgets and a network robust enough to handle a small data center. There was Sarah, the strategist, always calm under pressure and quick to spot weaknesses. David, the loud one, whose trash talk kept us all hyped up. And then there was me, just another foot soldier, happy to follow orders and contribute to the team. We were a motley crew, forged in the digital fires of Demon Slaying. The final wave began with a roar of infernal sound effects. My phone vibrated like a cheap massage chair as hordes of pixelated demons swarmed the screen. We unleashed our digital arsenal fireballs, lightning strikes, holy water grenades, anything to stem the tide. But they kept coming, relentless and unforgiving. My in-game avatar, a heavily armored knight wielding a glowing sword, was taking a beating. Healing potion now? I yelled into the Discord channel. Sarah's voice crackled back. On it, but watch your left. A hellhound's flanking you. I swiped frantically, trying to reposition my character, but I was too slow. The hellhound, a snarling beast wreathed in flames, lunged, its digital fangs sinking into my avatar's armor. My health bar plummeted. I'm down. I'm down. I cried out in frustration. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A collective groan filled the room. Power outages were common in our neighborhood, but the timing couldn't have been worse. No, no, no. Not now. Mark shouted, scrambling for his phone's flashlight. The room plunged into darkness. Then silence. A silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the frantic tapping of fingers on phone screens, now useless against the encroaching darkness. Mark, what's going on? Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. I don't know, Mark replied, his voice strained. Generator's not kicking in. Something's definitely wrong. Then the screaming started. It began as a low, guttural growl, like something ancient and malevolent being dragged from the depths of the earth. It rose in intensity, morphing into a piercing shriek that tore through the darkness, sending shivers down our spines. What the hell was that? David stammered, his bravado gone. And then we saw them. At first, they were just shapes in the darkness, vague outlines that seemed to coalesce from the shadows. But as our eyes adjusted, the shapes became clearer, more defined. And what we saw defied all logic, all reason. They were the demons from the game. Impossibly real, impossibly terrifying. They stood before us, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The hellhounds snarled, their fiery breath scorching the air. The hulking brutes lumbered forward, their massive fists clenched. And in the center of them all stood a figure wreathed in shadow, radiating an aura of pure evil. The Lord of the Abyss, the final boss from Call of Demons. Panic erupted. People screamed, scrambling back, tripping over discarded pizza boxes. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal fear that stripped away all pretense. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. What's happening? Someone shrieked. This can't be happening. But it was. The demons were here, and they were hunting us. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy glass bottle of soda, and hurled it at the nearest hellhound. It shattered against the creature's flank, but it barely flinched. It turned its burning gaze on me, and I knew, without a doubt, that I was marked. We have to get out of here, I yelled, my voice barely audible above the chaos. But where could we go? The demons were everywhere, their forms flickering in and out of the darkness. They moved with unnatural speed and strength, tearing through furniture, smashing windows, and grabbing anyone who couldn't escape their grasp. I saw David, the loudmouth, frozen in terror, his eyes wide with disbelief. A brute reached out and snatched him up, crushing him in its massive hand. I heard a sickening crunch and then silence. I didn't have time to grieve. I had to survive. I stumbled towards the back door, pushing through the throng of panicked bodies. I could hear the screams of my friends behind me, their pleas for help echoing in the darkness. But I couldn't stop, couldn't look back. I burst out into the night, gasping for breath. The world outside was no better. The demons had spread beyond the house, swarming the streets, attacking anyone they found. The neighborhood was a war zone, filled with the sounds of terror and destruction. I ran, blindly, desperately, hoping to find some semblance of safety. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The demons had come, and they were here to stay. As I ran, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened. How had a simple mobile game unleashed such unspeakable horror? Was it some kind of glitch? Prank gone horribly wrong? Or was it something far more sinister? A gateway opened by our collective obsession with the game? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the world had changed. The line between reality and fiction had blurred, and we were caught in the middle of a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. I tripped, falling to the ground. I looked up, and there it was, the Lord of the Abyss, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. It raised its hand, ready to deliver the final blow. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it never came. Instead, I heard a faint buzzing in my ear. I opened my eyes, and the demon was gone. I looked around, confused. The streets were empty, silent. The houses were intact. The only sound was the chirping of crickets. And then I saw it. My phone. The battery was dead, the screen black. Had it all been a hallucination? A shared nightmare brought on by sleep deprivation and too much caffeine? I don't know. But even now, years later, I still can't shake the feeling that what we experienced that night was real. The demons may have retreated, but they're still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to return. And I know with a chilling certainty that one day they will. And next time, there might not be a blackout to save us. The game, Call of Demons, has been removed from all stores and sites, and its existence is now a faded nightmare. But I still see them when I sleep. The air grew heavy, thick with a silence that pressed down like a shroud. It always started like this: the quiet before the storm, the eerie stillness before the fog. But this wasn't just any fog. This was the fog, the one they whispered about in hushed tones, the one that brought the past back to life, or rather undeath. I live in Silent Hollow, a town cradled in a valley where the mist loves to linger. Most of the time, it's harmless, a picturesque veil clinging to the ancient trees and cobblestone streets. But every few decades, something shifts. The fog deepens, its tendrils grow grasping, and it starts to remember. Remember the tragedies, the lost loves, the unresolved grief that seeps into the very foundations of Silent Hollow. I was 10 when the fog last came. That was the year my mother died. A tragic accident, they called it. A fall from the old bell tower. But I remember the scream, echoing in the fog-choked night. A sound that ripped through my childish innocence and left a scar that time has failed to heal. 20 years. 20 years I've carried that scream with me. A constant hum beneath the surface of my life. And now the fog is back. It rolled in last night, a silent, insidious tide. I saw it from my window, a swirling mass of gray devouring the streetlights, turning the familiar world into a ghostly imitation. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was it, the fog that remembers. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a fractured collage of memories. My mother's laughter, the comforting scent of her lavender perfume, and then the scream, sharp and piercing, followed by the heavy thud that still echoes in my nightmares. I woke up soaked in sweat, the room cold despite the summer heat. The fog pressed against my window pane, a suffocating presence. I tried to tell myself it was just the weather, a natural phenomenon. But deep down, I knew the fog was looking for me. I went downstairs, hoping a strong cup of coffee would clear my head. As I reached for the kettle, I heard it. A faint whisper, carried on the wind, seeping through the cracks in the old window frame. Thomas! My blood ran cold. My mother's voice. I hadn't heard it in 20 years, but I knew it instantly. It was raspy, weak, tinged with an unbearable sadness. Thomas, help me. I dropped the kettle, the clatter echoing in the suddenly silent house. I backed away, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. This couldn't be happening. It was just the fog, playing tricks on my mind. But then I looked out the window and I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a vague form coalescing within the swirling gray. But as I watched, horrified, the fog began to solidify, to take on a more defined form. A form that was all too familiar. It was her, my mother, or rather a twisted, spectral version of her. The fog had molded itself into the shape of her corpse, the same broken angle of her neck, the same vacant stare in her empty eyes. The fog mother. It was swaying slightly, reaching out a hand made of swirling mist towards me. The whisper came again, stronger this time. "Thomas, I'm scared." I scrambled back, knocking over a chair in my panic. I had to get out of here. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. I ran out the back door into the overgrown garden. The fog was thicker here, clinging to the trees like a living shroud. I could feel its presence, a cold, clammy touch on my skin. I looked back towards the house. The fog mother was there, standing in the doorway, her form wavering in the mist. She was starting to move, slowly, deliberately, following me. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, through the garden and into the woods that bordered Silent Hollow. The fog pursued me, its tendrils reaching out, trying to ensnare me. I could hear the whispers all around me now, a chorus of voices, all calling my name, all begging for help. They were the echoes of the past, the lost souls trapped within the fog, reliving their final moments. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees on the rough ground. I looked back. The fog mother was getting closer. I could see the details now, the cracks in her face, the vacant horror in her eyes. It was a grotesque mockery of the woman I once loved. "Why?" I screamed, my voice cracking with fear. "Why are you doing this to me?" The fog mother stopped for a moment, her form flickering. The whisper came again, closer, more distinct. They pushed me, Thomas. They didn't believe me. My mind reeled. My mother had always maintained she was pushed from the bell tower. The official report had ruled it an accident. Was the fog somehow dredging up the truth? The fog mother took another step towards me. "Help me tell them, Thomas. Help me get justice." I understood now. The fog wasn't just remembering. It was reliving. It was forcing me to confront the unresolved trauma, the unanswered questions that had haunted me my entire life. I got to my feet, my legs shaking. I couldn't run anymore. I had to face this, to confront the past, to finally lay my mother's spirit to rest. "Who pushed you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The fog mother reached out a hand towards me, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Old Man Hemlock up at the church. He wanted the bell tower for something dark. Old Man Hemlock, the town's reverend when I was a boy. He had died years ago, but the rumors about him had always been unsettling. Rumors of dark rituals, of forbidden knowledge. What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice stronger now, filled with a newfound resolve. "Tell the truth, Thomas. Tell everyone what he did. Expose him." The voice was fading, the fog mother starting to dissipate. I stood there, in the heart of the fog, as the spectral image of my mother slowly dissolved, her whispers fading into the silence. The fog still swirled around me, but it felt different now. Lighter, less oppressive. The echoes of the past were still there, but they no longer felt threatening. I walked back to Silent Hollow, my resolve hardening with every step. I knew what I had to do. I had to uncover the truth about my mother's death, no matter what the cost. The fog might remember, but I would act. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally bring peace to Silent Hollow, and to the memory of my mother. The fog was a reminder of the past, a dark and twisted one, but it was also a catalyst, a force that had finally pushed me to confront the demons I had been running from for so long. The fog that remember had brought my mother back in a way and given me a mission, and I wouldn't fail her. The scratching started subtly, a faint rasping I initially dismissed as rodents. It was an old house, after all, built back when nails were hand-forged and the silence of night was truly silent. I'd bought it for a steal, charmed by its rambling layout and the way the afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows. But the scratching grew bolder, more insistent, and soon it was impossible to ignore. It always came at night, just after the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight. a dry, rhythmic scraping from directly beneath the floorboards in my study. I tried everything to rationalize it. Mice, rats, squirrels, all plausible, yet none explained the unnerving regularity. I set traps, scattered poison, even hired an exterminator. Nothing worked. The scratching persisted, a nightly tormentor. Then came the voice. It was faint at first, a muffled whisper I could barely discern. I attributed it to fatigue, the stress of the unrelenting scratching, the creeping unease that had begun to permeate my days. But the voice grew louder, clearer, and horrifyingly familiar. It was my voice. "Help me?" It pleaded, the sound warped and distorted, as if coming from the bottom of a well. "Please, I'm trapped." The first time I heard it clearly, I froze, every nerve ending screaming. I stood in the center of my study, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, listening to my own voice begging for salvation from beneath the floor. "Who's there?" I croaked, my voice trembling despite my attempts at bravado. The scratching stopped. A long, agonizing silence stretched out, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, the voice, closer this time, laced with a chilling despair. "It's me. It's you. You stole my life." Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. I spent my nights wired with caffeine, listening to the voice, trying to decipher its cryptic messages. The scratching had become secondary, overshadowed by the sheer terror of this disembodied version of myself trapped beneath my feet. The voice spoke of memories I possessed, of events only I could know. It recounted childhood traumas, embarrassing moments, secret desires. Each whispered confession chipped away at my sanity, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Driven to the brink, I decided I had to see what was down there. I couldn't live with the scratching, the voice, the gnawing fear that had taken root in my soul. The floorboards in my study were old and brittle. Armed with a crowbar and a trembling hand, I began to pry them up. The wood splintered and groaned in protest, releasing a cloud of dust and the musty odor of decay. With each board I removed, the voice grew stronger, more insistent. Don't look at me," it rasped, the sound a guttural wheeze. Finally, I had cleared a large enough space to peer into the darkness below. I held my breath and shone a flashlight into the abyss. The beam flickered across dirt and cobwebs, illuminating the damp earth beneath the house. And then I saw it. A figure lay curled in the fetal position, its skin stretched taut over bone, its eyes wide and vacant, a grotesque parody of myself. It was decaying, rotting, yet somehow still alive. Its hair was matted and tangled, its clothes tattered and soiled. But the face was undeniably mine. Terror seized me, paralyzing my limbs. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, transfixed by the horrifying spectacle before me. The creature stirred, its skeletal fingers twitching. It slowly, painfully, turned its head towards me. Its lips peeled back in a ghastly grin, revealing rows of yellowed, pointed teeth. "You stole my life," it hissed, the voice raspy and weak, yet filled with an unimaginable malice. I want it back. I stumbled backward, the crowbar clattering to the floor. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Was this a hallucination, a waking nightmare, or something far more sinister? The creature began to crawl towards the opening I had created, its movements jerky and unnatural. It clawed at the dirt, pulling itself forward with a horrifying determination. I finally found my voice, a strangled gasp of pure, unadulterated fear. What are you?" "I am you," it croaked, its voice growing stronger as it neared the surface. "The you that should have been, the you that you buried, stole from, and left to rot in the dark." It reached the edge of the opening, its eyes burning into mine with an intensity that threatened to consume me. It stretched out a gaunt, claw-like hand and gripped the edge of the floorboards. "Give me back my life," it pleaded, its voice now a desperate snarl. Panic surged through me, overriding the fear. I grabbed the crowbar and swung it wildly, connecting with the creature's arm. It shrieked, a sound that echoed through the house, vibrating in my bones. But it didn't release its grip. Fueled by adrenaline and a desperate instinct for survival, I swung again and again until the creature's arm was a mangled mess of bone and sinew. Finally, it released its grip and slumped back into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it was dead. I slammed the floorboards back into place, hammering them down with a ferocity born of terror. I nailed them shut, adding extra nails for good measure, sealing the creature back in its subterranean prison. Then I fled. I left the house, the town, everything. I drove for days, stopping only for gas and the barest necessities. I ended up in a small, remote cabin in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. I changed my name, my appearance, everything about myself. But I can't escape the voice. It's fainter now, a whisper in the back of my mind. But it's always there, a constant reminder of the horror I left behind. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the mountains, I hear the scratching. It's a gentle, almost pleading sound. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that it will never truly be gone. The voice under the floor is a part of me now, a dark and twisted reflection of the life I stole. And one day, I fear it will come back to collect. The keys felt cold and heavy in my hand, a stark contrast to the humid August air clinging to me like a shroud. I'd inherited my grandmother's cabin, a place I hadn't visited since I was a child, a place steeped in whispers and half-remembered stories. It sat nestled, or perhaps, more accurately, crouched in the heart of the Blackwood Forest, a vast expanse of ancient trees that seemed to swallow the daylight whole. I wasn't one for sentimentality, but the cabin held a strange pull. My grandmother, a woman of sharp wit and even sharper eyes, had always spoken of the cabin with a reverence that bordered on fear. "The house has its own way, child," she'd warned me countless times. "Treat it with respect, and it might just treat you back." Now, a few years after her passing, and burdened by the monotony of my life in the city, I decided to heed that call. I gathered 7 of my closest friends: Mark, the cynic; Sarah, the artist; David, the academic; Emily, the ever-optimistic; Ben, the quiet observer; Jessica, the thrill-seeker; and Chris, the practical one, for a weekend getaway. A chance to reconnect, to escape the digital noise, and, perhaps, to uncover the secrets my grandmother had alluded to. The drive was long and winding, the asphalt ribbons slowly surrendering to gravel as we plunged deeper into Blackwood. A sense of unease settled over the car, a palpable tension that even Emily's forced cheerfulness couldn't entirely dispel. Finally, the cabin emerged from the trees, a dark silhouette against the fading light. It wasn't quite as I remembered it. The wood was weathered, the windows like vacant eyes staring out from a forgotten face. But it was the porch that truly unnerved me. The planks seemed to jut out at odd angles, the railings twisted into shapes that resembled teeth. Large, jagged, and menacing teeth. I dismissed it as my imagination, the trickery of the twilight, but the seed of unease had been planted. The first night was filled with the usual camaraderie. Laughter echoed through the cabin as we unpacked, started a fire in the hearth, and cooked a makeshift feast. But as the night deepened, a subtle shift occurred. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and clawing at the walls. The fire crackled with unusual intensity, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the room. It started subtly. A floorboard creaked when no one was moving, a flicker of movement in the periphery, a cold spot that lingered even near the blazing fire. Mark, true to form, attributed it all to the cabin being old and drafty, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The next day, Sarah, an avid painter, ventured out to capture the beauty of the forest. She returned pale and shaken, claiming she'd felt watched, that the trees themselves were whispering secrets she couldn't understand. David, armed with his extensive knowledge of folklore and local history, regaled us with tales of the Blackwood, stories of ancient rituals, malevolent spirits, and creatures that preyed on the unwary. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with unspoken fear. That evening, the house began to truly reveal itself. It started with the sounds. Not the creaks and groans of an old house settling, but deliberate sounds. A scratching at the walls, as if something was trying to claw its way in. A low, guttural growl emanating from the basement. And then, the teeth. The porch, which I had tried to rationalize as my overactive imagination, was now undeniably different. The planks had grown, elongated, sharpened. They were teeth, gnashing at the air, hungry for something. Jessica, driven by her thirst for adventure, insisted on investigating the basement. Chris, ever the pragmatist, reluctantly agreed to accompany her, armed with a flashlight and a healthy dose of skepticism. They returned minutes later, their faces ashen, their words stumbling over each other. "There's something down there," Jessica stammered, her bravado completely gone. "Something alive." Chris, usually unflappable, could only nod, his eyes wide with terror. "It moved," he whispered. "In the dark. I heard it breathing." Panic began to set in. We huddled together in the living room, the fire our only source of comfort against the encroaching darkness. The house seemed to be closing in on us, the walls groaning, the windows rattling as if desperate to be free. Then the doors slammed shut. One by one, the doors in the cabin slammed shut, locking us inside. We tried to pry them open, to force them, but they were immovable as if fused to the frame. We were trapped. The house was playing with us. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into complete darkness. The scratching at the walls intensified, joined by a rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the floor. Felt like a heartbeat, a monstrous, malevolent heartbeat. One by one, my friends succumbed to the terror. Ben, always the quietest, simply broke down, sobbing uncontrollably in a corner. Emily's optimism evaporated, replaced by a frantic, desperate plea for help. David retreated into his academic mind, muttering about ancient curses and forgotten gods. Mark, surprisingly, was the first to act. He grabbed a fireplace poker and charged towards the basement door, determined to confront whatever lurked within. He disappeared into the darkness, and a moment later, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house. Then silence. The house had claimed its first victim. The teeth on the porch grew larger, sharper, and stained with a crimson I didn't dare identify. Sarah, consumed by hysteria, grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began to carve symbols into the walls, hoping to ward off the evil that surrounded us. Her screams joined the chorus of terror that filled the cabin. Chris and Jessica tried to barricade the windows, but the glass shattered, splintering into 1,000 shards that rained down upon them. They retreated, their faces bleeding, their eyes filled with despair. I watched in horror as my friends were consumed by the house, their sanity unraveling, their lives forfeit to the malevolent entity that dwelled within. I clung to the last vestiges of my reason, desperately searching for a way out. Then I remembered my grandmother's words. Treat it with respect, and it might just treat you back. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to connect with the house, to understand its purpose, its anger, its hunger. I remembered the stories my grandmother had told me, the tales of the Blackwood, of the ancient spirits that guarded the forest. And then I understood. The house wasn't evil. It was a guardian, a protector. But we had disturbed it, awakened it from its slumber. We had trespassed on its territory, brought chaos and discord into its peaceful domain. I opened my eyes and walked towards the porch. The teeth, now monstrously large, seemed to be waiting for me. I reached out and touched one of the planks, running my hand along its jagged edge. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "We didn't understand. We didn't mean to disturb you." I don't know if the house heard me, if it understood my plea. But as I stood there, a strange calm washed over me. The scratching at the walls subsided. The thumping heartbeat faded. The doors unlocked. The house had relented. I stumbled out of the cabin, leaving behind the horrors I had witnessed, the friends I had lost. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first rays of dawn painting the trees with a tentative gold. I never went back to the cabin. I left it to its slumber, a silent sentinel guarding the Blackwood forest. but I carry the memory with me, a chilling reminder of the house that grew teeth and the price we paid for disturbing its peace. Sometimes, I still dream of the porch, of the jagged, hungry teeth, and I can't help but wonder if it's waiting for me, ready to complete its feast. The attic was always my domain, a dusty, forgotten space above our living room. It housed relics of our past, forgotten Christmas decorations, and boxes of my daughter Lily's outgrown clothes. But lately, it had become something else, something sinister. It started subtly, with a chill in the air whenever I passed the attic door. Then, Lily's dolls began appearing up there. Lily was 8, a bright, imaginative child with a collection of dolls that rivaled a small toy store. They were her confidants, her friends, her tiny plastic family. Initially, I'd just find one or two up there, perched on an old trunk or leaning against a stack of books. I'd bring them back down, scolding Lily for not putting them away, but she'd always deny taking them up there. But Mommy, I didn't. I swear. They were right here on my bed. I dismissed it as a child's forgetfulness, a convenient way to avoid blame. But then it escalated. More dolls are arranged in a circle in the center of the attic floor. The chanting started a week after that, a faint, high-pitched murmur that I initially brushed off as the wind whistled through the gaps in the old house. But it grew louder, clearer, and then I recognized the voice. It was Lily's. "Join us, Mommy. Join us. We're waiting for you." It was a chorus of Lily's voice, emanating from the circle of dolls. Their plastic eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light filtering through the grimy attic window, fixated on me. My blood ran cold. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, and a touch of madness creeping in. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This house, our family home for generations, had a history, a dark undercurrent that I had always tried to ignore. My grandmother used to whisper stories about the attic, about a tragic event that had occurred there generations ago. A young girl who had fallen or been pushed. I'd always dismissed it as folklore, old wives' tales to scare children. Now, I wasn't so sure. The chanting continued night after night. It seeped into my dreams, turned them into nightmares filled with grinning dolls and Lily's distorted voice. I couldn't tell Lily. I didn't want to frighten her. Instead, I consulted a local historian, a kindly old woman named Mrs. Hawthorne who knew everything about the town's past. She listened patiently as I recounted the events, her eyes widening with each detail. When I finished, she sighed, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to fill the room. "The attic," she said, her voice low. "It's always been a place of unrest. There are whispers, old stories, the energy from the past, the pain. It can cling to a place, manifest in strange ways. But the dolls? The chanting? What does it mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It means something wants to come through. Something is using Lily's innocence, her connection to those dolls, as a conduit. What can I do?" Mrs. Hawthorne thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Cleanse the space, sage salt, prayer. But more importantly, protect Lily. Keep her away from the attic. Sever the connection." I followed her advice. I bought sage and spread salt around the attic door, chanting prayers I hadn't uttered since childhood. I kept Lily away from the attic, filling her days with games and outings, trying to drown out the insidious whispers that haunted my mind. For a few days, it seemed to work. The chanting subsided. The unease faded. I dared to hope that I had banished whatever darkness had taken root in our home. This morning, I woke up to silence. The house felt empty. Lily wasn't in her bed. Panic clawed at my throat. I searched the house, calling her name, my voice growing increasingly frantic. Then I heard it, the chanting, louder than ever before, resonating through the floorboards, vibrating in my bones. It was coming from the attic. But it wasn't just Lily's voice anymore. There was another voice, deeper, raspier, laced with malice. "Come, Mother. Join us. We're all waiting." Fear propelled me towards the attic door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the key. I threw the door open and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The dolls were arranged in a perfect circle, their plastic eyes gleaming with unholy light. Lily was in the center of the circle, her eyes vacant, her skin pale. She was swaying gently, her lips moving in sync with the chanting. But it wasn't just Lily. Standing behind her, a shadowy figure coalesced from the dust and shadows. It was gaunt and skeletal, its eyes burning with an ancient rage. I recognized the girl from my grandmother's stories, the one who fell or was pushed. She has returned. Lily! I screamed, my voice cracking. The figure turned its gaze on me, a malevolent grin stretching across its face. She's ours now, it rasped, its voice a symphony of pain and hatred. She belongs with us. And you, Mother, you belong here too. The dolls started to move, their plastic limbs twitching, their eyes fixed on me. They began to chant louder, their voices a cacophony of childish innocence twisted into something grotesque. Join us, Mommy. Join us. We're all waiting. I felt a pull, a hypnotic force drawing me towards the circle. My feet moved involuntarily, drawn by the chanting, by Lily's vacant stare, by the promise of something else. But then, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I was a mother. I wouldn't let this thing take my daughter. I wouldn't succumb to the darkness. I focused all my will, all my love for Lily, into a single desperate act. I grabbed the kerosene lamp that stood on a nearby table, the antique I had always wanted to use. With a guttural scream, I hurled it towards the circle of dolls. The lamp shattered, the kerosene igniting instantly, engulfing the dolls in flames. The chanting stopped abruptly. The shadowy figure shrieked, a sound that tore at my soul. It recoiled from the flames, its form flickering and dissolving. I rushed to Lily, pulling her from the center of the circle. She was limp in my arms, her eyes still vacant. I carried her out of the attic, away from the flames, away from the darkness. As I stumbled down the stairs, I glanced back. The attic was ablaze, the flames licking at the rafters, consuming the dolls, the shadows, the darkness. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning plastic and something else, something ancient and evil. I carried Lily outside, away from the inferno. I laid her on the grass, cradling her in my arms. Slowly, her eyes flickered, and recognition returned. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice weak. "I'm here, baby," I sobbed, holding her tight. "I'm here." We watched as the flames consumed our house, our history, our past. But as I held Lily in my arms, I knew that we had a future free from the darkness that had haunted our home. The house was gone, but we were alive. We were together. The fire raged on, but as I looked into Lily's eyes, I knew that the real fire, the fire of my love for her, was stronger than any evil that lurked in the attic. And that was enough. The screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the sickening crunch of metal, these are the last sounds I remember before the blackness. Then, just as abruptly, came the sterile beeping of machines, the hushed voices of nurses, and the suffocating awareness of being alive when I shouldn't be. The doctors called it a miracle. My heart, they said, was beyond repair. But medical science, in its relentless march forward, offered an improbable solution: a mechanical heart. A marvel of engineering, they assured me, a life-saving symphony of gears and springs. I was too weak to argue, too grateful to question. I signed the consent forms, desperate for another sunrise, another breath. The first few weeks were a haze of recovery. I learned to live with the constant, rhythmic ticking in my chest, a relentless metronome marking the passage of time. It was unnerving at first, a constant reminder of my unnatural state. But I adapted as humans do. I learned to ignore it, to filter it out, to pretend it was just another bodily function like breathing or blinking. But as the months wore on, the ticking grew louder. It wasn't a gradual increase, but rather a series of unsettling jumps. One night, it was a gentle murmur, barely audible. The next, It was a booming resonance that vibrated through my ribs, shaking me awake in the dead of night. I complained to my doctor, Dr. Albright, a man with perpetually worried eyes and a condescending smile. He ran tests, adjusted settings, and assured me it was just my perception, heightened by anxiety. Stress, he said, was a common side effect of such a radical procedure. I tried to believe him, but the undeniable reality was that the ticking was getting louder, more insistent. It was driving me mad. I started sleeping with earplugs, but even they couldn't completely block out the infernal clockwork symphony. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a prison, the ticking echoing in every corner, mocking me with its mechanical precision. Then came the night it stopped. It was 3 in the morning. I was lying in bed, trying to coax myself back to sleep after another bout of insomnia fueled by the relentless ticking. And then silence. A sudden, absolute silence that was more terrifying than any noise. My heart, my artificial mechanical heart, had stopped. Panic seized me. I clawed at the emergency call button beside my bed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I was dying again, but this time, there was no car crash to blame, no external force to fight. It was my own body, or rather, the machine that was keeping it alive, that was betraying me. Dr. Albright arrived, looking even more haggard than usual. He worked frantically, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of the bedside lamp. After what felt like an age, the ticking sputtered back to life, a weak, hesitant sound that gradually grew stronger. I survived, but something had changed. The silence had broken something in me, shattered the fragile piece I had managed to construct. The near-death experience had opened a door, or perhaps it had simply removed a filter. Because now, the ticking wasn't just louder. Now it whispered. At first, I thought it was sleep deprivation playing tricks on my mind. But the whispers were persistent, clear, distinct. They were numerical, a string of numbers that repeated over and over, a relentless, rhythmic mantra emanating from my chest. I started writing them down, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. I filled page after page with the same sequence of numbers, wondering if they were some kind of error code, a sign that the machine was malfunctioning. Then, one morning, after another sleepless night, it hit me. The numbers weren't random. They were coordinates, latitude and longitude. The realization sent a chill down my spine. What could coordinates possibly mean? Where was my clockwork heart trying to lead me? Driven by a compulsion I couldn't resist, I fed the coordinates into my GPS. The location was a small, forgotten cemetery, nestled in the woods a few miles outside of town. I hesitated. The thought of going there, alone, in the dead of night, filled me with dread. But the whispers in my chest were growing louder, more insistent, drowning out any sense of reason or caution. I had to know. The cemetery was a desolate place, overgrown and neglected. The headstones were weathered and cracked, their inscriptions barely legible. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. I walked slowly, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, searching for the grave that corresponded to the coordinates my heart had whispered. And then I found it. It was a small, unassuming headstone, almost completely hidden by a tangle of ivy. The inscription was worn, but I could make out the name, Eleanor Ainsworth. Beneath it, a single date, 1938. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know who Eleanor Ainsworth was, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my mechanical heart had led me here for a reason. I knelt down beside the grave, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the cold, damp stone. The whispering in my chest intensified, a cacophony of numbers that threatened to overwhelm me. And then I heard another sound, a faint, rhythmic thumping, coming from beneath the ground. It was the sound of a heartbeat, not my own, not the mechanical ticking of the clockwork heart in my chest, but another heartbeat, a faint, muffled thumping that echoed from the earth, a sound that had been buried for decades, waiting to be awakened. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What was happening? What had my heart led me to? As I backed away, My foot struck something buried in the leaves. I looked down and saw a small, tarnished silver locket. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against a cold, metallic surface. I opened the locket. Inside, nestled against a faded velvet lining, was a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, her eyes wide and frightened, her face pale and gaunt. Around her neck, she wore a necklace with a clockwork heart. The whispering in my chest reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter my skull. I looked down at my own chest, felt the relentless ticking of the mechanical heart beneath my skin. I understood. Eleanor Ainsworth hadn't died of natural causes. She had been murdered. Her heart, her clockwork heart, had been stolen. And somehow, after all these years, it had found its way into my chest. The coordinates weren't just leading me to her grave. They were a plea for justice, a desperate attempt to reveal the truth, to expose the darkness that had been buried for so long. I don't know what will happen now. I don't know how to bring Eleanor Ainsworth's killer to justice. But I know that I can't ignore the whispers in my chest. I can't silence the clockwork heart that beats within me. It is a burden, a curse, a terrifying responsibility. But it is also a purpose. And in the face of the unimaginable horror that has been thrust upon me, I will embrace it. I will follow the coordinates. I will unearth the truth. Because the clockwork heart in my chest, the heart that was stolen from a grave, demands it. And I, its unwilling vessel, have no choice but to obey. The ticking grows louder every night, a relentless reminder of the unfinished business, the secrets buried deep within the earth. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that my journey has just begun. The hum started subtly, a high-pitched whine that nestled just at the edge of my hearing. At first, I dismissed it as tinnitus, a cruel reminder of too many years spent too close to roaring machinery. But the whine persisted, growing each night, resolving itself into the unmistakable crackle of static. It always happened at midnight. I live alone in this old Victorian house, inherited from a great-aunt I barely knew. The house is filled with shadows and whispers, the kind that settle into old wood and linger in the dusty air. I'd always chalked it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night horror movies. That was before the TV. It's an old Philco, a behemoth with a wood-paneled cabinet and rabbit ears. It sat dormant in the attic for years until, on a whim, I dragged it downstairs, nostalgic for a time before streaming and on-demand. It worked perfectly for a week, showcasing grainy reruns of classic sitcoms. Then the static began. At first, it was just a flicker, a momentary blip that quickly corrected itself. I figured it was the aging tubes, a simple fix I could research online. But the flickers grew longer, more frequent, always culminating in a full-blown blizzard of white noise precisely at midnight. Then I saw it, a shape, a dark silhouette within the static. It was vague, amorphous, but undeniably there. A crawling figure, limbs akimbo, moving slowly, deliberately, across the snowy landscape of the screen. I tried everything. New rabbit ears, a signal booster, even a desperate, late-night Google search for demonic interference with television signals. Nothing worked. The static returned each night, bringing with it the creeping shadow. Each night, it moved closer. At first, it was barely visible, a smudge in the distance. Then, it crept to the middle ground, its crude, almost skeletal form becoming more defined. Now, in the swirling chaos of the static, I could almost make out details. The unnatural angles of its limbs, the suggestion of a head lolling to the side. Fear, a cold, clammy hand, gripped my heart. I started sleeping with the lights on, the harsh glare a feeble shield against the encroaching darkness. I tried distracting myself, burying myself in books, listening to music, anything to drown out the impending midnight hum. But the anticipation was a relentless drumbeat, pounding in my ears, growing louder with each passing hour. Last night, the figure's hand breached the screen. It was a fleeting glimpse, a momentary solidification of the static. But I saw it. A long, skeletal hand, fingers impossibly extended, reaching out from the chaos. The image burned itself onto my retinas, a chilling promise of what was to come. Panicked, I lunged for the power cord, desperate to sever the connection, to banish the creeping horror back to whatever dimension it had crawled from. But the cord wouldn't budge. It was entangled not just in the outlet, but in the wall itself. It looked as if the rubber and copper had somehow grown, interwoven with the plaster and wood, becoming a grotesque part of the house's anatomy. I tugged harder, pulling with all my might, but the cord remained stubbornly, unervingly rooted. That's when I noticed the other cords. The lamp beside the couch, the extension cord snaking behind the bookshelf, even the phone charger plugged into the wall. All were fused, intertwined, with the very fabric of the house. It was as if the house itself was feeding the TV, nourishing the static, allowing the shadow to emerge. Despair settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own home, with a monster inching its way out of the television and into my reality. Tonight is different. The hum began earlier, growing louder, more insistent. The static is already swirling, a vortex of white noise dominating the screen. And the figure is almost out. His torso is visible now, a grotesque parody of human form. Ribs protrude from its emaciated frame, and its head hangs at an unnatural angle, as if its neck is broken. Its single visible eye, a black void, stares directly at me, radiating an ancient, malevolent hunger. I can smell it now, a faint, acrid odor like burning metal and decaying flesh. It wafts from the television, filling the room, choking me with its palpable evil. I've tried to leave to escape this nightmare, but the doors are locked, the windows sealed shut. The house won't let me go. It's as if it wants me here, wants me to witness the culmination of this horrifying ritual. I'm sitting on the couch now, paralyzed with fear, watching as the figure pulls itself further from the static. Its legs, long and spindly, are the last to emerge, dragging behind it like broken branches. It stands, or rather, slouches before the screen, its black eye fixed on me. It raises its hand, the one I saw last night, and a chilling grin stretches across its face, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It steps out of the television. The static dissipates, leaving behind a clear, empty screen. The room is plunged into an unnatural silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. The figure shuffles towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I can see the details now, the textures of its decaying flesh, the glint of madness in its eye. It stops in front of me, towering over me, its shadow engulfing me. It reaches out, its long, skeletal fingers brushing against my cheek. A voice, raspy and guttural, whispers in my ear. "We have been waiting." I close my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. This is it. This is the end. But then, something unexpected happens. A flicker of static. Not on the television, but in my vision. The world around me blurs, distorts, and then I see it. I see myself, sitting on the couch, paralyzed with fear, watching the figure emerge from the television. But there's another me, standing behind the figure, bathed in the ghostly glow of the static. The other me is smiling, a wide, triumphant smile. And then I understand. I'm not the victim. I'm part of it. I'm the static. And we are finally home. The figure's touch is no longer terrifying, but welcoming. It's an invitation. I stand up, joining it, stepping into the swirling chaos of the static, becoming one with the darkness. The house sighs, content. The hum fades, and on the television screen, a new figure begins to crawl. The static had been a constant companion for weeks, a low, hissing counterpoint to the blues I usually chased through the airwaves. I'm a night owl, always have been. The hum of the city lulls me, and the soft glow of my ancient tube radio is often the only light in my small apartment. I'm a writer, or at least I try to be. The nights are for thinking, for crafting, for trying to wrestle meaning from the chaos. But lately, the radio offered more than just static. It offered a voice. At first, it was faint, a whisper lost in the noise. I dismissed it as interference, some atmospheric anomaly bouncing off the ionosphere. But it grew clearer, more persistent. It spoke in a low, gravelly murmur, like a man who'd spent a lifetime gargling with gravel and regret. The station, if you could call it that, didn't identify itself. There were no call letters, no jingles, no announcements, just the voice and the descriptions. The first time I truly paid attention, I was pacing my living room, wrestling with a particularly stubborn paragraph. The voice crackled to life, cutting through the static. "He's walking to the window," it rasped, "looking out at the city lights." I froze. I was walking to the window. My blood ran cold. Coincidence, I told myself. A lucky guess. I went back to my desk, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Then it happened again. "He's sitting down now," the voice said, rubbing his temples. "The paragraph still isn't working." That was it. The coincidence was officially dead. I switched off the radio, my heart hammering against my ribs. I paced the room, trying to rationally explain it away. Maybe it was a neighbor with a powerful transmitter playing some kind of twisted joke. Maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a joke. And I was pretty sure I wasn't crazy. At least not yet. I stayed away from the radio for a few days, but the silence was worse. The city noises seemed amplified and oppressive. My thoughts echoed in the void, amplified by anxiety. I needed the radio. I needed to know. I switched it back on, the familiar hiss filling the room. I waited, breath held, knuckles white as I gripped the tuning dial. The voice returned, but this time it was different. There was a note of anticipation in its tone, a subtle shift that made my stomach clench. "He's back," it said. He couldn't stay away. I didn't move. I just listened, paralyzed by a dread so profound it felt like a physical weight. "He's listening," the voice continued. "He wants to understand. He thinks he can figure it out." "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. The voice didn't answer directly. It just chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "He's reaching for the volume knob," it said, turning it up. "He wants to hear me better." I almost didn't, but the compulsion was too strong. My hand moved, seemingly of its own volition, and the sound intensified, the static buzzing in my ears. "Careful," the voice warned. "Some things are better left unheard." I ignored it, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't control. The voice began to describe my days in excruciating detail. What I ate, what I wore, the conversations I had, the thoughts that flitted through my mind. It was like living under constant surveillance, every moment cataloged and broadcast to someone. I tried everything to stop it. I unplugged the radio, smashed the antenna, and even wrapped the entire thing in layers of tinfoil, like some paranoid conspiracy theorist. But nothing worked. The voice persisted, seemingly emanating from the very air around me. Desperate, I researched the history of radio, looking for some explanation, some precedent. I pored over technical manuals, read accounts of strange atmospheric phenomena, and even dabbled in theories about parallel dimensions leaking into our own. I found nothing. The voice grew bolder, more malevolent. It started to predict the future, small things at first, like a phone call or a visitor. Then, the predictions became darker, more unsettling. It described accidents, illnesses, conflicts within my social circle. Each prediction came true, a grim reminder of the voice's power. I was trapped, a puppet dancing to the tune of an unseen puppeteer. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford, haunted by nightmares filled with static and gravelly whispers. My writing stalled, my life unraveled. I was losing myself piece by piece. Then came the final broadcast. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blank page, the radio humming softly in the background. The voice, which had been silent for hours, crackled to life. "He's sitting at his desk," it said, its tone laced with a chilling finality. "He knows it's over. He's accepted his fate." My heart lurched. I knew what was coming. I could feel it, a cold dread seeping into my bones. He's afraid, the voice continued, but he's also curious. He wants to know what happens next. It paused, the static filling the silence. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. "She's standing behind you," the voice said. My blood turned to ice. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. "She's very close," the voice whispered, the sound now separated from the radio, echoing from behind and all around me. "Can you feel her breath on your neck?" A cold, spectral breath that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to scream, but my vocal cords were paralyzed. The voice chuckled, a low, triumphant sound that filled the room. "She's been waiting a long time for you," it said. "She's going to make you one with her." I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable, but the touch never came. Instead, the voice continued, or perhaps not. Maybe the game isn't quite over yet. I cautiously opened my eyes. The room was the same, bathed in the soft glow of the radio. The static hissed, but the voice was gone. Had I imagined it all? Was it a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and stress? I didn't know. All I knew was that the fear remained, a constant companion lurking in the shadows. I glanced at the radio and noticed something different. The dial, which had always been fixed, was now slightly moved. It rested on a frequency I'd never seen before, one that shouldn't exist. Beneath my breath, I muttered, "What do I do now?" But I knew what I had to do. I reached out without hesitation. I grabbed the knob and turned it slightly. The air crackled back to life. If you're reading this, it means I failed. Failed to stop it, failed to warn you in time. Maybe you found this journal tucked away in my study, or perhaps a neighbor, concerned by my absence, stumbled upon it. Whatever the reason, heed my words, for the danger is real, and it is closer than you think. My name is Mark, or rather, was Mark. The man who writes these words is a shadow of his former self, haunted by a darkness that clings to the very air I breathe. It all started with Old Man Peter's tombstone. You remember the story, of course. Everyone in Harrow Creek does. Peter Abernathy, a recluse who lived on the outskirts of town, a man steeped in strange lore and whispered rumors of devil worship. When he died, his grave was marked with a simple, unadorned stone. Then, a week later, it vanished, just gone. The local authorities shrugged it off as vandalism, teenage pranksters. But I knew better. I'd been researching local history for years, delving into the forgotten corners of our town's past. And I'd come across mentions of Abernathy, his name linked to rituals and ancient, malevolent entities. That's when I started this journal, a chronicle of my investigation. I dismissed my initial fears as academic curiosity, a harmless fascination with the macabre. How wrong I was. The first sign that something was truly amiss was the dreams. Vivid, disturbing visions of Abernathy, not as the frail old man I'd seen in photographs, but as a figure of terrifying power, his eyes burning with an unholy light. He would beckon me, his voice a rasping whisper that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. "Come, Mark," he croaked. "The darkness calls." I dismissed them as stress, too much coffee, a mind overactive with morbid thoughts. But the dreams persisted, growing more intense each night. And then the other things started happening. Objects moving in my house, flickering lights, the chilling scent of damp earth and decay that would suddenly permeate a room. I tried to rationalize it, blaming faulty wiring, a draft, my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew Abernathy was reaching out from beyond the grave. My research intensified. I pored over old texts, grimoires, and forgotten histories, searching for a way to understand what was happening, to find a way to stop it. I learned of a ritual, a dark rite that required a specific artifact, an artifact that Abernathy had possessed in life. A fragment of obsidian said to be a gateway to something other, something terrible. And then it hit me. The tombstone. It wasn't just a marker. It was a seal. Its removal had weakened the barrier between our world and whatever Abernathy had been trying to keep contained. I knew I had to find the stone. I started with the local cemetery, combing the grounds, questioning the caretaker. Nothing. Then, I expanded my search, focusing on the wooded areas surrounding Abernathy's old property. The air there felt different, heavy with a sense of dread. The trees seemed to watch me, their branches gnarled and twisted like grasping claws. It was during one of these searches that I found it, a clearing hidden deep within the woods. In the center stood a crude altar made of stacked stones, stained with something dark and viscous, and lying on the altar, bathed in the sickly green glow of the twilight, was Abernathy's tombstone. Relief washed over me. I found it. I could put it back, reseal the barrier, end this nightmare. But as I reached for the stone, a voice echoed through the trees, a voice I knew all too well. "You've come so far, Mark. I knew you wouldn't disappoint." Abernathy. He was there, not in the flesh, but something else. An apparition, a psychic projection, a fragment of his consciousness clinging to this world. He materialized before me, his eyes burning with that unholy light. "You cannot stop what is coming, Mark. It is inevitable. The darkness hungers, and it will be fed." I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. He was in my head, his thoughts invading my mind, filling me with a paralyzing fear. He spoke of things I couldn't comprehend, of ancient powers and forbidden knowledge, of a world beyond our own, waiting to be unleashed. He told me that the stone was no longer a seal, but a key. The key that, once used, would unlock a gate to something unspeakable. I fought against his influence, trying to regain control of my mind. I knew I had to destroy the stone. Anything to stop him. However, he grabbed my hand from my body and dragged me near the tombstone itself. The darkness in his eyes consuming my soul. I was now him. But it was too late. He had already planted the seed of obsession, of knowledge. The darkness was calling to me now, too. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in a mental battle with Abernathy's ghost. But when I finally broke free, I was no longer the same. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else, a terrible curiosity, a dark fascination with the power Abernathy had promised. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy the stone, but a part of me, a dark, corrupted part, wanted to use it. I fled back to my house, the tombstone clutched tightly in my hands. I locked myself in my study, barricading the door, trying to shut out the darkness that was closing in. That's when I started writing this. A confession, a warning, a desperate plea for help. But as I write these words, I know it's too late. The darkness has taken root. It whispers to me in the shadows, promises me untold power. I can feel it now, pressing against the walls of my mind, urging me to embrace it. And the worst part is, a part of me wants to. I can hear the scratching at the door now, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. It's not just the wind, I know. It's the darkness, clawing its way in. If you find this, please heed my warning. Stay away from Abernathy's tombstone. Stay away from the woods. Stay away from Harrow Creek. Burn this journal. Destroy any trace of Abernathy's existence. And pray that the darkness doesn't find you, because it is relentless. It is patient, and it will not stop until it has consumed everything. I can hear him calling me again. His voice is stronger now, more seductive, more inviting. "Come, Mark," he whispers. "The darkness awaits. I think I have to go." The tombstone has been moved. I am free, but there is no light. The air hung thick and sweet with the scent of drying corn, a deceptive perfume that couldn't mask the growing terror in my chest. The corn maze, once a charming autumn diversion, had become a living nightmare. I'd been a fool to stay past dusk. Now the towering stalks were a prison, their rustling leaves whispering secrets only I could understand, or perhaps secrets they only wanted me to hear. "He knows," they sighed, a collective chorus that chilled me to the bone. "He knows what you did." I stumbled forward, pushing through the dense foliage. What did I do? The question echoed in my mind. A frantic ping in the suffocating silence broken only by the relentless whispers and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The paths, I realized with growing dread, were changing. What had been a clear route just moments ago was now a dead end. a wall of brittle stalks blocking my way. The maze was alive, shifting and twisting, conspiring against me. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the periphery, a dark shape dancing just beyond the rows of corn. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned, my eyes straining to pierce the growing darkness. And then I saw it clearly, a silhouette. It was humanoid, the same height as me, the same general build. But it was wrong, terribly, fundamentally wrong. It was my shadow, except shadows don't hold knives. The figure mimicked my movements with unsettling precision. When I raised a hand to my face, it mirrored the gesture, the glint of steel in its hand flashing in the sliver of moonlight that filtered through the corn stalks. Panic seized me. I bolted, blindly charging into the maze, the chorus of whispers rising to a frenzied crescendo. Run, they urged, but you cannot hide. He knows you. He is you. I didn't need to be told to run. The image of that blade, held by a creature that was both me and not me, was burned into my retinas. I scrambled through the maze, ignoring the scratches on my arms, the sharp edges of the dry leaves cutting into my skin. I zigzagged, doubled back, tried to find a pattern, anything to outweave the labyrinth and my terrifying doppelganger. Each rustle of the corn, each creak of the stalks, sounded like the footfalls of my pursuer. I risked a glance back and saw it, a dark shape effortlessly keeping pace, the moonlight glinting off the knife. It wasn't just mirroring my movements anymore. It seemed to anticipate them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of accusatory voices. Murderer, they hissed. Liar, you deserve this. I stumbled, my foot catching on a hidden root. I fell hard, landing on my hands and knees, the breath knocked out of me. Despair threatened to overwhelm me. The silhouette emerged from the corn, its features still obscured by the shadows. But the knife was clear, sharp, and deadly. As I lay there, paralyzed with fear, a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. An argument fueled by jealousy and rage. A shove, a fall, a silence that echoed in my head even now. I hadn't meant to. It had been an accident. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. He knows. He always knew. He is the truth you tried to bury. The silhouette raised the knife. Suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just a shadow. It was my conscience, my guilt, given form. It was a manifestation of the truth I had tried to deny, the darkness I had kept hidden within myself. And it was here to collect. I braced for the inevitable, closing my eyes and waiting for the sting of steel. Instead, I felt nothing. I opened my eyes. The silhouette was gone. The whispers had subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence. Had it all been a hallucination? A waking nightmare fueled by guilt and fear? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. The maze hadn't changed. I slowly rose to my feet, the weight of my guilt now a tangible burden. I still had to find my way out of the corn maze, but this time, I wasn't just running from a shadow. I was running towards the truth, towards the reckoning I so desperately deserved. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, if I could face the darkness within, I could find a way out of this maze, both real and metaphorical. And maybe, just maybe, find redemption. The whispers were silent now, but I knew they were listening, waiting to see what I would do. And so was I. The auction house was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old money and hushed anticipation. I wasn't a regular, not even close. Truth be told, I was there on a whim, drawn by an online listing that had piqued my morbid curiosity. Portrait of an unknown woman, provenance unknown. The painting was tucked away in a corner, almost hidden. It was a life-sized portrait, depicting a woman with striking resemblance to myself. The same high cheekbones, the same slightly upturned nose, even the same shade of auburn hair cascading down her shoulders. It was unsettling, like looking into a distorted mirror from a past life. The auctioneer droned on, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Bids were tepid, the painting clearly not a prized piece. I surprised myself by raising my paddle. Perhaps it was the uncanny likeness, or maybe the sense of mystery clinging to it like dust, but I had to have it. To my astonishment, I won. They delivered it the next day. The canvas was heavier than I anticipated, the frame ornate and clearly antique. I hung it in my living room above the fireplace where it dominated the space. It was beautiful in a haunting sort of way. The woman in the portrait possessed an ethereal quality, her eyes holding a sadness that resonated deep within me. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept picturing the woman's face, her silent gaze following me in the darkness. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with fragmented images of old houses, whispering voices, and a chilling sense of dread. The next morning, I walked into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. The portrait, it was different. The woman looked older, just subtly, almost imperceptibly, but the lines around her eyes were deeper, her skin a shade paler. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, went about my day, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Each morning, the change was more pronounced. The woman in the portrait was aging and aging rapidly. Her youthful beauty was fading, replaced by the harsh realities of time. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the paint was reacting to the air, maybe it was some kind of optical illusion. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Then came the nightmares. Vivid, visceral nightmares that left me sweating and breathless. I dreamt of the woman in the portrait, her face contorted in agony, her eyes burning with an unholy light. I dreamt of being trapped in a labyrinthine mansion, chased by shadowy figures with clawed hands. One morning, I woke up to a blood-curdling scream. It wasn't mine. It came from outside. I rushed to the window and looked out. People were pouring out of their houses, their faces etched with terror. They were pointing, screaming, their eyes fixed on my house. Confused and frightened, I turned back to the portrait, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The woman was gone. In her place was a monstrous visage. The face was still recognizably human, but twisted, distorted into something utterly demonic. Her eyes glowed with malevolent intent, her lips drawn back in a grotesque snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The canvas seemed to pulse with an unearthly energy, the air around it shimmering with heat. The screams outside intensified. I could hear people shouting, praying, begging for mercy. The air crackled with static electricity. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my head throbbing with an unbearable pressure. I stumbled back, away from the portrait, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out. I had to escape this nightmare. I lurched towards the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. I tried the window, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Then I heard it, a giggle. It was high-pitched and chilling, like the sound of shattered glass. It came from the portrait. I turned back, my body frozen with terror. The demonic figure was smiling. The smile was wide, unnatural, revealing even more of those horrifying teeth. And then it spoke. The voice was like nails on a chalkboard, scraping at my sanity. It was my voice, but twisted, corrupted, filled with an unimaginable hatred. "Hello, me," it croaked. "You took so long to notice." I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost in the rising crescendo of terror outside. The screaming had reached a fever pitch, blending into a single unified cry of despair. The portrait began to glow brighter, bathing the room in an eerie light. The demonic figure reached out a clawed hand, beckoning me closer. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in the gaze of that horrifying creature. "Come," it rasped. "Join me. We have so much to show everyone." The house began to shake violently. The walls cracked, the floorboards groaned. I could feel the very foundations of the house crumbling beneath me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the smiling face in the portrait, its eyes burning with malevolent triumph. I don't know what happened to the others on my street. I don't know if they escaped. All I know is that I am trapped here, in this nightmare, forever bound to the painting and the demonic entity that now resides within it. And every day, the smile grows wider, And there it festers, the rot beneath the rain. If you've lasted this long, congratulations, or condolences. Ring the bell unless you want the next horror to find you unprepared. Tell us below, which story slithered deepest into your psyche? Share this video with someone who claims they don't scare easy. Then watch their bravado bleed out. But tread carefully, survivor. The nightmare doesn't end when you click away. It waits, patient, gnawing, in the static between your thoughts. Until next time, sleep with one eye open. The void always repays its debts.